Welcome to the 10,000 Things Zoom for October 20th, 2018. I'm Robert Saltzman, author of the 10,000 Things. If you are new to my work, let me suggest that you dip into that book. There are links to free chapters in the description. My guest today is Bernard Guy, and I know that many people have been looking forward to this interview. Before turning it over to Bernard, I'd like to try to clear up a couple of matters which have arisen in response to my book and previous Zooms. In the first place, although I speak and write in earnest and as truthfully as possible, nothing I say should be accepted as capital T truth. I have no such truth to offer, but only how these matters appear to me from my perspective in this moment, entirely subject to change. I emphasize this because apparently my saying in the 10,000 Things that I find myself awake has for some people proved confusing. So before we begin, please understand, this is not a satsang, but rather a conversation among friends with an interest in these matters. My feeling that I, Robert, find myself awakening and awakened from a hypnotic trance goes back many years, but I never spoke much about it until my friend, Buddhist teacher, Dr. Robert Hall, got me involved in working with some of his students. That led to an interview with John Troy on his radio show, Wisdom's Soft Whisper, and then becoming an admin for John's Facebook group, Conversations with Avant-Garde Sages. I think it was there where I first met Bernard. But perhaps it was a bit later, after I left the Sages group and formed my own group called Awaken to True Nature. This was 2010, I think, or 2011. I left that group too, but it still survives thanks to the efforts of Tommy Cantrell, and all the old conversations are there, including many featuring Bernard Guy's ideas. Now and then in this life, I've run across someone like Bernard, someone who also seems awake in the way I mean that word. But that's rather rare and always a lovely occurrence. So much talk on these matters seems mostly a naive, superstitious repetition of ideas from some scripture or another, or a quotation from some so-called master. I have little patience for that. On the other hand, certain kinds of talk are ever so much better than others, more intelligent, more honest, more open-ended. So don't let the deconstructionists who like to say that any one thing is as good as any other talk us out of discerning the difference. Without discernment, we humans are idiots run amok. Even with discernment, we are all idiots at times, aren't we? So with that as background, let me turn this over to Bernard Guy. Bernard, where shall we be?
Good question, Robert.
Yeah.
Where shall we begin? Well, one thing I can see that I go along and we have the same view on that. And one of the reason, in spite of our differences, that we kept in contact and we kept appreciating one another is something you just said more than once, I guess, is the fact that whatever you're saying is your perception right now, is your view, your understanding, but you're holding it lightly. You don't claim that it's any absolute truth. You're open to the fact that it might change any moment. So there is something about that that always touch me because I feel the same too, which is whatever view I happen to have now, well, or to hold now, or combinations of view, Um, I'm increasingly aware since quite a while by now that it can change any moment. Who knows? It's really open. It's really open-ended. And we share that in common. You know, if on the one hand we can be quite or come through as quite confident about anything we might say about these matters, we're also well aware that God knows as it goes, you know. It's what's happening now, it's what's coming out now, it's how I see it now. But the next moment, who knows? I had to learn definitely in my own journey um, that not only whatever anyone else's say or what any book says about these matters um, is not relevant to my experience now, in the sense that I'm alive now and what's happening for me is now, and it has nothing to do with what's happening with somebody else. But even my own experience, moment to moment, as it drops into nothingness, as it disappears, I also cannot hold on to that. It's not because something happened a minute ago or an hour ago or yesterday or 6 months, however wonderful, however freeing, however beautiful, that it means that it's what wants to happen now or what is happening now. And this I really had to see and learn in the course of time. So there is a commonality here between you and me of recognizing however it might appear would be a good word, however it might appear to us this moment, who knows about the next moment? You know, we remain open. So there's that.
Yes, I think that's something that we agree on deeply.
Yeah.
We really don't know what's going to happen next, and our memories of what occurred before are not facts. They're only versions. And most often, for most of us, they are versions that are tainted with emotions and feelings, which could either be feelings of superiority or feelings of inferiority. It's a very rare human, in my experience, who sees herself or himself pretty much just as one is. That's really a challenge. I think you and I agree on that. It's so that this topic of spirituality to me seems very often dark and benighted, in the sense that answers are offered, but the questioners are not truly invited to go into their own experience, their own personality, their own fears, their own desires, and to work with that material.
Yeah.
So many of us just want to be told how it is, and we want that to be comforting, life after death, or God loves you, or whatever that comforting idea is, and then just cling to it. Now, this came up for me yesterday. Um, I had posted a photograph of a crash pad for agricultural workers. It's a very strange place. I was in there for a while with the camera. You could be in Mogadishu or something. I mean, and here it is right in my little town. Very, very sad and dangerous place also, I should say. Well, I posted that photograph, and with it, I quoted myself from some previous post where I basically said, if you find yourself in good circumstances, there's no praise or blame involved. It's just luck, because you didn't choose your circumstances of birth, your parents, the neighborhood you grew up in, all of those influences, they just arrive as if by fate. Well, I got immediate pushback from the karma people, and they were just out for blood, out for blood. One woman, I had to block her, ban her, which I really don't like to do, but it was necessary. The other fellow, at least, was civil, so I'm not going to block him. He has a right to his views. But his view was so naive and stupid that I did not feel like replying to it. And what he was saying is, karma is a fact. How do I know that? All the world's religions agree on it. They all agree. They're all the same. Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, they all embody karma. And that's just so factually false. Those religions differ in many ways, and the idea of causality is definitely one way in which they do not all agree. But I didn't bother to tell him that because he is suffering, as all of us humans do, from the confirmation bias, which means collecting information greedily if it supports what we already think or what we want to believe, and ignoring or forgetting anything that tends to work against our beliefs. And if I had engaged him, I would have been engaging this bias, which is really a blind and idiotic part of human psychology, has nothing to do with any search for truth. And then, Bernard, I was going into some of your past writings, and I just hit on a paragraph where you said exactly that, that trying to equate one religion to another is a fool's journey because they don't agree. They do not agree. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
Well, I'd like to pick up on the karma thing. As I see it, there's two ways to look at things. You can look at things from the point of view of space and time, and the fact that, if I shut my computer down, then you will disappear. If I get up and walk in the room, I'll be walking in the room. If the cloud gathers and a certain change of atmosphere and pressure happens, rain falls, so we can talk of cause and effect on the level of space and time and ordinary life. That's a valid point of view. So from that point of view, because as far as I understand karma, it's about that, it's about cause and effect. So I find a validity in that. I cannot deny that from that point of view, it's a valid assessment that, as you sow, so you will reap. If you sow a banana seed, you'll get bananas. And if you sow. But that's only one point of view. The problem starts with any point of view, which now we're tying back with the story of the different spiritual approaches and religions and all that. There might be some truth. As far as I'm concerned, more and more I see there is some truth in all of them. The problem starts where they're saying this is it. It's the only point of view. That's where that's the catch for me. So back to karma, there's another point of view in the here and now, where if you really pay, forget my English, close attention, it is possible for you to suddenly realize that the totality of what is happening right now is being generated, produced, call it what you want. It's emerging, arising right this moment. It cannot be coming from a cause, past moment, because there is no past moment. It's always totally fresh, new, every split second. Even a split second is not accurate. How fast is it? You could say a millionth of a second, a billionth of a second, you still would be too long. It's like you cannot catch it. It's just, which implies also that every moment everything is destroyed. The whole cosmos is like disappearing and suddenly we're back. From that point of view, it's irrelevant cause and effect. It doesn't apply. It doesn't apply. Whatever is happening each single moment is totally unrelated to any event that happened in the past. Absolutely completely, because obviously whatever happened in the past cannot be producing what is happening now, because it's gone, it's finished, it's dead, it doesn't exist. So whatever is existing now has to be totally produced now and now and now. So I see that the 2 points of view are valid. But if anybody holds to one of the two and says it is only that, well, now we've got a problem. So back to the religions where you were asking about that, I feel the same. And, you know, they each talking about spirituality, they each propose a given ultimate about the true nature of reality. And well, that's where the problem starts. So if anybody really takes the time to really read a bit, you know, all the different positions and all that, at some point you always say, wait a minute, you know, here I have, let's say, a dozen different approaches, and they're all saying that the realization they had of a certain whatever dimension, whatever we want to call it, of being, this is the ultimate. But now I have 12 in front of me. Now, wait a minute, you know. So I end up with either there are many ultimates. Well, there's no either. The moment I say there are many ultimates, it doesn't hold. Ultimate means ultimate. There cannot be many ultimates. So in my own journey, I went through the whole process of recognizing that and then seeing that, well, they all say different things about what is the ultimate. And at some point, the very concept of ultimate dropped away. So to me, there are no ultimates anymore. I really question the very fact of that. And that's another thing we agree also. You know, we have the same view, as far as I understand with you right from the beginning, about really talking about what could be. I say could, what could be, if we could get down there, the ground, very ground, you know, most profound and deep, basic, fundamental truth about reality. Well, who knows? Who knows? So anything to me that any path is sharing, they're, you know, my own experience, they're talking about different things, different realizations, different experience that they have. Some of them compute with my own experiences, so I can say, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Others, well, I don't know, it's not my experience, but, you know, I'm an open guy. So as a working hypothesis, if you tell me, well, there's that, you know, and one of the core feature of reality is that, because for me, it's all features. What is what is at the core, we can't say because it's featureless. I'm very clear about that, that it's featureless, because if it would have a feature, it would show in everything it's manifesting. If it would, let's say, if the color green would be a fundamental feature of what's at the core of reality, then somehow everything would be a little greenish, right? Or if it was square, well, it would be a bit like cubism, you know, when you look at those paintings, they made everything square. It would show. But because it's truly nothing, then it has the freedom to manifest as everything. And that's tricky when I say that. It sounds as if there's this thing separate from the manifestation that has the freedom. I'm just seeing that there's this manifestation of a billion ways in all the ways. So obviously, whatever it is that is at the heart of that, the purity at the heart of that, is free of all that, while it's being all that, but it's free of all that. It cannot be one of that. And yet it is fully that too, but that too, and that too, and that too, which take us back to where we started, which is, for me, definitely, it's very clear by now that whatever any human being can say, has said, and will ever say about the true nature of reality, well, he's sharing his own limited, although it can be immensely valuable. The limitation doesn't mean it's not valuable, but it's limited. And every best, my taste, best spiritual person or artist or musician or painter, they all have this basic humility because they're the best they know. Because they're the best they know that, wow, what do I know? You know, the more I've been sharing that in some of my comments on Facebook, you know, the more I've been playing guitar for 50 years. And the truth is, as years are passing and time is passing, I am mastering it more and more. I know it more and more. Because I am mastering it more and more and knowing it more and more, I see that how little I know it, and how little I master it. Because I know it more and more, I know how little. Somebody who doesn't know much, what was it? I think it was Socrates is reported to have said, when I was young, I didn't know much and I wanted to know. In the middle of my life, well, I thought I'd start really to know a good bit. Now at the end of my life, I really know how little I know. You know, it's so something like that.
Wowie, that's really lovely. What a statement. I just like to clarify my comment about karma.
Okay.
I don't mean that if I want to win the lottery, I have to buy a ticket, not just expect to find one blowing in the breeze. That seems obvious. Um, so there's cause and effect, at least in our daily lives or everyday quotidian lives, our everyday lives. But that's not what these people were saying. I had said, accompanied by this photograph of a kind of miserable, frightening life. And meanwhile, I'm walking around well fed with a camera around my shoulder and seeing this and speaking with these people. Well, what I had written is when I look at myself and how I got into this favorable condition, at least temporarily, it's all luck. Oh, why? Why is it luck? Because
Yeah.
I did not choose this body, this brain, my parents, and other influences, the schools I went to, the kids in my kindergarten class, all of it, that all arrived as fate, like fate. I don't say there's fate. I like to call it luck. If I've got a PhD, I've had a beautiful career of working in various fields. It's been a wonderful life up until now, including some sadness and pain. But it's been a good life. Other people seem to start out in misery and are stuck in that misery no matter what they do. And that's just luck too. I mentioned Mogadishu. What if instead of a nice home with parents who liked me, I had been born one of 16 unwanted children living in some hovel? That could be me, because what is me after all? It's this awareness. And the cat in the hovel in Mogadishu has the same basic awareness, just not the same luck, I say. So the part of karma that I disagreed with after this presentation, then I was hit with all this karma nonsense. What these people were saying was, yes, Robert, but you chose the parents. You chose the neighborhood you chose your body, you chose your brain. Well, at that point, show me the evidence. And if the evidence is some scripture told you that, or
Yeah.
some grinning guru on a stage told you that, well, I'm not down with that. That's way, way beyond sanity, in my view. Yes. At this point, unless you want to comment, Bernard, I'd like to kind of open the floor to the others and see if anyone else wants to express some views.
Sure, let's do it.
Okay. If you want to speak, try this out. Simply turn on your mic and start speaking.
Okay. Yes, Robert, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Great. This whole idea of karma, excuse me, but I think your guest is a very interesting, wonderful man with more wrinkles even than you or I. But this whole idea of karma is something that has bothered me for many years. I think of it more in the terms of this idea of some people that you take and you give back. Not that we choose things or don't choose. The Tibetans talk about it, and other people, that we choose where we live and so on, which implies that we existed before. In other words, reincarnation, which I don't really know about. But the idea that we choose where we are, I think, doesn't make a lot of sense, because who the hell would choose to live in Darfur or in some of the other horrible, well, you know, as a child in Yemen being bombed by the Americans and, you know, through their Saudi people at the moment? It makes no sense. But in terms of the law of reciprocal maintenance, that we take things and give them back, this is a very interesting question for me. Perhaps you might comment on that.
Yeah, everyone's heard from me quite a bit. There's been a lot of Zooms by now. So I think when these questions arise, I would like to ask you, Bernard,
Right.
to respond to them.
Well, I think you have a very good point, Sterling. You know, I responded by starting by saying that as far as I'm concerned, there's definitely a reality to the cause and effect standpoint. From the standpoint of, you know, of space and time and being an ordinary human being in the planet Earth and all this, there's a reality to that. So what you bring up, I can perfectly go along with that. Definitely, if I slap somebody on the face, there's all the chances that, you know, I'll get slapped back or something, you know. And if I give a hug to someone, there's a good chance I'll be hugged back. So it's not about denying any of that as far as I'm concerned. It's not about denying, you know, if somebody joins the Zoom meeting with Robert Saltzman and Bernard Guy, perhaps they will come out of it with a little, you know, little more something that will give them something to reflect upon for the benefit of their own personal life. Maybe not also, you know, who knows what the effect can be or could be. So to me, it's clear that this is real. And I love that, Robert, that you brought the point that you already, you know, that what they meant is tying that up with some past life and all that. So I'm also not concerned with that. Definitely not if there's nothing in my experience that supports that. If there's something in my experience that really my personal experience, which has nothing to do with what anybody has said about past life, then, you know, I can take that into account and I have to deal with that because I had a certain experience this way or that could relate to it. Yet definitely, so I get the point you were saying, definitely back to this lifetime. Well, it's a very good idea to take into consideration the fact that something you do will have consequences. It's a very good idea, you know. If you leave that out the window completely, there's good chance you end up with a lot of trouble.
Yeah, well, so it's so obvious, really, that as ye sow, so shall ye reap. This is
right.
You don't need any spirituality or religion.
Right. Exactly. Right.
But this, you mentioned your own experience, you find no support for past lives.
Well, I said, if I find no support, then I just don't know. But I also get your point, which is a central point, that if one is going to start using whatever anybody else experience is just as a belief, well, then that's really infantile, obviously.
Yes, so this is a very...
At the most, in my own case, whatever anybody else can say about those matters, if it rings a bell for me, I can take it as a working hypothesis. I like this, I like this term, a working hypothesis. So you tell me that, well, okay, I'm open, let's see. But I have to ascertain for myself on the basis of my own intimate, heartfelt, personal experience, the reality of that. If it doesn't compute with my own experience, it's meaningless to me.
Yeah, so this is a really central point, I think.
Yeah, sure. We have that in common.
Yeah, this is a central point, because there's a lot of wisdom in this world, and there's not just one person who has it. There's a wisdom of humanity that can be expressed partly in words. And if we don't listen to any of that, then we're just throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Many babies.
Many babies, yes, lots of babies. But if we take the other route, which unfortunately is what I see so much, and it's part of my critique of spirituality. If some cat sitting on a stage tells you that he's got inside information that you don't have, and expresses it verbally, and then you say, oh yeah, that resonates with me, and then there's no more questioning, there's no more looking within, well, that's worse than throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
I understand.
So I think what a man like you has done with his fine mind, and myself and others here, we've read and listened to the wisdom of the ages. We've tried it on, and what seems to work for us in the moment, we will work with that, but only provisionally, because in the next moment, things may appear very different indeed.
All right.
So let's hear from someone else. Is there someone who would like to join in the conversation?
While I'm waiting for someone with more thing, I had this what we call working hypothesis once, which was called I made this up. It had to do with the karma, in the sense of, I called it the karma of the law of hydrogen. It's a little bit weird, if you excuse me, Robert. The idea that we take from things and then we give back as people or as any kind of entity. And if we take back, we take from something, from the universe, from the cosmos, then we give back. And if we give it back in a right way, or in a way that sustains the process, then we don't have too much karma. But if we take from things and don't give anything back or destroy things, then it doesn't work. And I called it the karma theory of hydrogen, because hydrogen is the basic element in our universe. So that you grab some hydrogen from the universe and you use it, and then you give it back. And if you don't give anything back, then things start to go strange. Is that too weird for you, or? You see, I'm trying to find a way for karma, because it's hard for me to believe that people can do terrible, terrible things and then not have any consequences.
Yeah,
I
well,
don't understand that exactly.
Well, Sterling, I would say, Gurdjieff and Gurdjieff's teachings was, I started my whole journey with Gurdjieff when I was about 17 and 18. And then I read, for a number of years, I read everything I could, put my hand on. So it seems to me that you're talking about the idea that he brings, or the way he brings it, of reciprocal, right? Something reciprocal.
The law of reciprocal maintenance, exactly.
Right, exactly.
Thank you, Bernard.
You got it. Well, for me, if we look at it simply, we're back to what we were saying, that the reality of cause and effect, Now, my point of view about, that's because you brought up, if somebody does something horrible, as opposed to do something good with what one is given, right? What about the consequences and all that? I was in fact saying that recently. I had to go in court. I'll spare you the details, for the first time in my life about a week ago. And a friend who was a witness in my case, who came as a witness, an old friend, we were coming back from there in his car. And at some point he said, and the cause with the other person was just telling so much lies. He was just so much into lying and deception and all that. And at some point that friend said, well, he'll pay for it at some point, typical enough. And I found myself responding spontaneously, I don't know about that. All I know is that he's paying now. He is paying now, because the state he's in to make him go into such lies and deception, wow, poor guy, poor guy. So for me, it's not later, heaven or hell or purgatory, it's not later. Karma is not later. Now, that's an interesting point too. Hearing myself say that, that's interesting too. Karma is not later. It's right here, cause and effect. Because whatever I'm causing is, we could say, is an effect of all kinds of things that happen to me. So if I'm a very, sad, miserable, unconscious, tortured, twisted, ignorant person, well, of course I'll create trouble. Of course I'll create trouble. Then beyond that, it's still a mystery to me, back to, let's say, Robert was bringing the thing that for him it's all luck. Could call it good fortune or bad fortune. Yeah, looks like that. Is there more to it? I'm open. Personally, I'm open that there's more to it. Whether there is more to it or not, I do not know. I'm clear that I do not know. It's a good question.
Let me jump in here and clarify. When I say it's all luck, I mean, as far as I know, I certainly do not ever speak as an authority on reality. And I think that needs to be underlined or emphasized, because I walked on some dangerous ground when I said I find myself awake. To many people, that might sound like a claim to some kind of authority, but really, in my experience, it's quite the opposite. Part of being awake is that you understand that you really don't know anything about reality. And this is being presented to you in real time and then just passing away before you can really get a grasp on it at all. So I wonder how that strikes you, Bernard.
Well, I'll pick up on something that we've been, exchanging about that, I'm sure, a lot in the whole group years ago. And it's something that I find myself, bringing back up again and again, and I probably will again and again, though I'm open that it might change one day. You know, I'm not one to say that you cannot know the true nature of reality, but there's a catch. I'm not saying, like many say, that this is the true nature of reality. I'm saying that this is the true nature, and this, and this, and this. I say you can know it, and know it, and know it. Like you often say, you know, you will often bring in that there's no way to know it. But then I'm listening to you carefully. I know it's since quite a while. When you say this aliveness, so here's one thing about it. It's alive. So you know that. When you say I'm awake, you're talking about an awakeness, about an awareness, about an awakenedness. So you know that. So I say it can be known and known and known and known endlessly. The catch is that, well, there's two catch. The catch is there's no end to knowing it. It's inexhaustible as far as I can see from my own experience. And the other catch, which is more a subtle thing, and we've talked about that also, is that whatever you know about it, which you do know more and more about if you're, you know, if you pay attention and you're interested in noticing what it is that you actually know, because you know it, you just know it. You're like, I'm alive, right? I'm awake. It says something about one of the features of reality as it manifests itself as manifestation, as its expression. Now, it doesn't, so it says something about some of its features. So I said that before using the word feature. But what it is in itself, that featureless, for me, necessarily featureless, because if it would be like some say only it's love, or it's awareness, or it's emptiness, like the Buddhists say, love, like the Sufis say, it's awareness is a big one in the non-dual, you know, contemporary scene. You know, awareness, 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 consciousness, consciousness, all is consciousness. Well, for me, those are features. And it is my own experience that, yes, one feature of it is pretty lovable, pretty sweet, and pretty loving. And one feature is, yeah, it's pretty awake. And one feature is, yes, it's pretty conscious. And one feature, and another feature, and another feature, and another, and a dozen other, and a dozen more, and a dozen more. I see no end to it. And I would give the example back to my playing guitar. The more I play it, the more I discover new ways of playing it. So I can, with authority, quote unquote, say I know it more and more. The more I know it, the more I recognize, wow, what the fuck do I know? Because I know it more and more. So there's this apparent paradox, but if you're given to be intelligent enough, and it's not a paradox, it totally makes sense. When you know little of it, it's easy to think that you know a lot, blah, blah, blah. But when you really start to know something, you really start to know how little you know. And when you go deeper and deeper and you're knowing it more and more, you realize more and more, wow. It would be like having a small opening in the infinite sky in the night, you know, with all the galaxies. And you have a little opening. And then you look, you say, wow, I know it, you know, and then the opening starts to open, and the more it happens, the more it opens, the more it happens, the more it opens, the more you're, oh my God, what the hell? What do I know? What have I seen? So it's tricky. It's tricky. And personally, in the past, I've seen myself taking the position that it can't be known, it can't be said, it's a pure mystery. And I've also fell into, I know it, and here it is. And well, good fortune, I'm just lucky, I guess. I'm just get to this point where I see that, well, there is that position. I know what they mean when they say that. Then there's the people I know what they mean. More and more, it's like people come up with all those things. I know what they mean. I know what they mean. Another thing, or do you want to respond to that? But there's another thing that is interesting.
Oh, no, keep going, please. You're doing great.
Okay.
Fabulous.
However accurate is that, you know, you have a background where You know, you've mentioned yourself Zen, right? The whole masters, Krishnamurti, Alan Watts. So, in
Also,
my own
also George Gurdjieff, also very
yes,
much so, very much.
right. Yeah, and I'm sure others along the way, surely.
2 or 3.
Right.
Thank you for that about
So,
Mr. Gurdjieff.
what is that, Sterling?
I just said thank you to Robert for his mention of Mr. Gurdjieff.
Yeah, we love him.
Yeah,
So,
let me interrupt for a second just to keep it on Mr. G for a moment. It's so interesting because when I first got into that, I did what you did, Bernard, although it was later in my life, but I just read all books and the books by students and all this. I immersed myself in it. And it meant a lot to me. And then when I would mention occasionally to someone that that's what I was interested in, they would say, "Oh, well, that guy was a scoundrel. He was a terrible person." And it just shows that it's really hard to tell what anything is unless you get really deeply into it. Just from the surface, something could seem one way and it could be something else completely.
yeah, that reminds me that, you know, recently I posted it on my timeline. So I've been going through those old posts. And so I've been posting in the last post what I call bits and bytes from the writings vault. One of the bits and one of the bytes or the bit is at some point I say, it's like jewelry, you know, to be able to assess the value of a gem. Well, you need to learn jewelry. And it's actually, I think it's the Sufis who bring up this analogy. To be able to assess the value of a gem, you need to learn jewelry. Because if you don't learn jewelry, well, you know, a piece of ordinary quartz or crystal, you could think it's a diamond, or you could think that the diamond is a, you know, a faceted, ordinary piece of glass. So I won't go more into that, but it just came up, you know, with what you're saying about Mr. Gurdjieff. That, yeah, to be in order to assess, you know, with some accuracy the value and the limitations and the strength and the weaknesses of any given teaching, well, you need to know, you know, definitely at least a thing or two better. In fact, the more you know about the whole domain, the more you're in a position to assess the value of it. Are you still there, Robert? Your video disappeared.
I'm still here, Bernard.
I'm still here.
Thank you very much for
Yeah,
your
I know you're there, Sterling. Just Robert at disappeared.
I'm still here.
Right.
I had my camera off for a minute.
Okay.
So
I'll come back here because I think it's a valuable point. What I wanted to say before Mr. G butt in. So given your background, you know, to a degree or another, definitely as far as our expression is concerned, it's tied up with the personal journey we had. So, you know, I'm definitely not a Zen scholar or a Zen specialist. I did read quite a few books, you know, on Zen in my early years, my young years, my journey. And later on, as things were opening up and, you know, different realizations were arising and, you know, insights and understanding, one way that I understand where some of them are coming from or were coming from, you know, the Zen cats, and is from a realization that has to do with what I call non-conceptual awareness. Now, what is non-conceptual awareness is the fact that you're aware, you're awake, but you're so much, you're so much at the heart of this awakeness and all that, that there's no knowing at all. There's no knowledge operating at all in that place. So I give you an example, which was like the first definite.
Before you get to the example,
Yeah.
Something's changed about your lighting and the entire
Oh, I know. I see. Wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we should be back to normal.
Mucho mejor.
Yeah, it's because there's this window there, and then it's.
Yeah, got it. Okay, you were saying.
I was saying what?
You were talking about the Zen cats and
non-conceptual awareness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you're there, you're in a place where it just can't be named. You just can't name it. So one day I lived in India for many years. I'm lying on my bed. It's facing a window. The window is open, sunlight, the wind is blowing, the trees are swaying in the sunlight. I'm just resting, beautiful afternoon, taking a rest. I'm not asleep. Lying down, I close my eyes, and then, I just rest and just being there. Retrospectively, I could say, that I probably ended up in quite a comfortable, deep enough space of just being there. Suddenly, by themselves, my eyes pop open. And then my eyes pop open, and I'm looking, like I said, there's a window in front of me. I still see it in my mind eye because it was like a turning point, the beginning of something, though I can see there were, at the first, but something became more different. My eyes pop open, and I'm looking out that same window and the same trees and the same wall and the same sunlight and all. And I have absolutely, completely no idea what I'm looking at. I mean, none. I mean, the best way I could describe that would be, because we can all relate to that. Well, take a month-old baby when he's just, looking around. If you're a little perceptive, a little sensitive, it's very obvious that he has absolutely no idea what he's looking at, because actually he doesn't have yet any functioning concept, right? He has no functioning concept. So he's seeing the wall, but there's no wall for him. It doesn't exist. He's not seeing a wall. He's definitely seeing, but there's no knowing of what he's seeing. So that's what happened. I was lying there. I had no idea. There was no room, no wall, no window, no sunlight, no wind, and yet they were all there. But I had absolutely no idea what I was looking at. Non-conceptual awareness. So my feeling and my understanding, provisionally, is some people are really informed by, and it's a definite kind of realization in my experience and understanding. Some people are informed by that in their view of reality. And they will readily say, you can't say a thing about that. It can't be named. You can't point to it in any definite way. And I understand what they mean. They're right. They're right. From this point of view, there is no way you can say anything about it. Everything you will say will just be a man-made story, a man-made concept, which is, in a sense, anything I'm saying, anything you're saying, anything anybody has said, anything any human being will say, they're all human stories. We're telling ourselves and one another about something that is just unnameable. So, yeah.
Well, yes, indeed. Well, so let me invite some of the others at the meeting if you'd like to comment.
Yes,
Question to Bernard. Just turn on your mic.
Yeah, I am here, Bernard.
Martina.
Hi. Actually, it's more of a sharing, I guess, rather than a question. That the expansiveness of the different experiences that you're bringing to this. I can say that I have similar experiences of this disappearing. Sometimes it's during my morning, my journal writing.
Excuse me, Martina, please turn off your video. It will be a much better recording if it's just your voice.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, is that going to help, or otherwise I'll just go ahead and stop?
Yeah, that's much better.
Okay, great. I'll have an experience of writing in my journal, and there's this hand writing, but it's not mine. It's that type of nothing that I, Martina, have set out to do. There's no doingness in it at all. It's a happening, and it's an experience that, at least in my experience, comes and goes. It's nothing that is attainable. Another thing that I notice in the way that you've been experiencing this, how did you say it? Non-conceptual?
Yeah, non-conceptual awareness.
Yes, I can see the difference in how it appears for me, which is I will look out a window, and I have this beautiful view here in Baja California of the mountains and the ocean at the same time. And I can look out this window, and suddenly everything is so quiet within this awareness, and there's no judgment. So I would say it's, for me at this stage anyway, the judgment falls away. I'll see the beautiful ocean, but I wouldn't use the word beautiful. I see an ocean, if that makes any sense. The I is no longer present. The I that judges even beauty is no longer present. It doesn't diminish the beauty. This is why it's hard to talk about. It doesn't diminish the beauty, but I'm not judging it as beautiful. Does that make sense?
Sure, it makes sense, Martina.
Okay.
Sure.
I don't, this is this is about the only place I can talk about this. So I am pleased that
I think that every human being has moments like that. Being in front of nature often makes that happen. Suddenly your mind stops and you're just there. There's just the purity of the experience. Yes. What I call non-conceptual awareness is something else. Like in many circles, non-conceptual is used as meaning the direct experience, not via concepts. So for me, what you're saying would fit in that category. I can just be there, and concepts are not operating. The mind is not commenting. There's, like you said, there's no judgment. There's no mental comment. There's no commentary. There's just this being here and all that.
Then there's a spaciousness that opens up out of that, which is
right. Yes.
It's totally impossible to describe, name, or conceptualize. But it's more of a step that's fallen into rather than, gosh, I don't know, a destination. I don't know.
I understand. But I want to make, I'm making a distinction here,
hear this.
To go on in what I mean by non-conceptual awareness. Because when you're there and you're just being there and you're seeing the ocean and the beauty of it without conceptualizing beauty and all that, you're just being there. Yes. If I would ask you, you would still say, yes, there's this ocean and I'm sitting here seeing the ocean, right?
Okay.
But what I'm talking about is you couldn't say that. A good example of that would be, so I said my own experience, I was looking through the window. I was lying on the bed and I was seeing the room and seeing through the window, the tree swaying in the sunlight and all that. But I had absolutely no idea of what I was looking at. Okay. You would have asked me, I would have stayed mute. And it's coming back to mind. A good example would be also, Now, I don't want to, well, we could talk about him, but I just to bring him in, and he's not the first one. Yuji Krishnamurti, right? He talks at some point about what he calls the calamity when he woke up. when he woke up. He woke up and he ended up in a totally non-functional state.
Okay.
Where he had no, it's like he was born again, no idea, you know, he would look at flowers, no idea that it's a flower. He had to relearn that, okay, this is a flower and this is this and this is that. At the beginning, he just didn't know, and he had a girlfriend or there was a woman around, and by, slowly, you know, the whole conceptual mind started to function again, and then he could start to function again. But initially, it was like, he couldn't function because he had no idea about anything because it was all gone. So something like that. Like the same thing happened for me. So I'm lying there in the bed. I have no idea who or what. Like a newborn baby. He has no idea who or what because there's no who yet and there's no concept to tell what. And then slowly, I remember vaguely, slowly by and by, the mind, you know, and concepts started to come back, and slowly I arose again, my ordinary.
Okay.
And then I could look back into the experience and say, wow, you know. And then from that moment on, that happened before, but that was like a turning point. From that moment on, I could start to explore more. What was that when it was arising? Because it can arise any moment. I was more in a place where something in me.
Yes.
Because at the core of reality, it's there all the time. That's one thing in my understanding and experiences is any level, dimension, aspect, quality of reality, they're all simultaneously present every split second because it's the totality of reality that is being everything.
Okay.
So it's all present.
Right. Yeah, and as you describe it, I can't imagine anyone really wanting that destination. You know what I mean? I mean, why would a religion? I mean, I'm doing this kind of with a sense of humor. Is that the way that you described it? That total disappearance would be terrifying for most people. So that wouldn't necessarily be set up in a religion to want as a goal to go to totally disappear as you're describing, because I would see that the ego or the I of us would be terrified to see us disappear to that degree.
But some of them, you know, they can mean that, you know, the concept of the void, which I always like to point the word avoid, the concept of the void or emptiness, you know, if you really push it, you get there, you know.
Yeah.
But my point is that it's always there, that. And also, the day you have it, only a small taste of it, I mean, it's part of it's part of the best, because then everything is so fresh, completely new. You know, we can all feel that when we see a baby, and he's like, we can see that he has no idea but why he's wide awake and he's just looking around and what the hell, you know? So it comes with that such a level of awakeness and freshness and newness, and it's like one taste of it, it's like, wow, you won't forget it. You won't forget
Beautiful, beautiful, Bernard. Thank you for that. I'm going to step back now and let someone else come in.
My pleasure, Martina. Thank you for sharing. Anything to say, Robert?
Well, there are some things there I'd like to respond to, but before I get to that, I'd like to invite others at the meeting to have a chance to put their oar in the water, because you keep a low profile, and this is a great opportunity for people to ask you questions.
Okay.
So please feel free. Anyone in the group here, just turn on your microphone and speak.
Hi, everybody. Robert and Bernard. Bernard, this is my first exposure to you and your work, and I'm familiar with Robert's perspective on free will. I believe there is feel there is, have experienced that there is no free will. I would like to know your perspective, and that would kind of create even a bigger container for what we're speaking about. Is what is your perspective on free will, or the illusion or delusion of free will?
Right. That's a big one.
Yeah, it is.
Let me jump in here for just a moment, gentlemen. I'm doing this because there's someone else at the meeting, Manoj Reddy. He's in India and has a bad internet connection. And he sent me a question very similar to that on free will. And I promised I would put the question to you, Bernard.
Read it now. Maybe we can address simultaneously.
I see that Manoj is here. He just doesn't have the connection to.
Yes. Okay, right. Manoj.
Now you're speaking to at least two gentlemen here.
Right. So what was Manoj's question? Do you have it in front of you?
I could get it up here. I've had it written down. Let's see. Yeah, let's get Manoj's question in here too.
Yeah, you know, if it.
That's beautiful. You have a feeling for this. Pretty soon you'll be doing the Zooms and I'll be the guest. The feeling that there's no free will gives a feeling of ease. But at the end of the day, it's just a belief unless one experiences it. And I have not experienced it. If anything, I tend to overthink and overanalyze decisions as if I really had free will. But then I only end up with headaches. Is the absence of free will impossible to understand, no matter how much one tries, unless one experiences it? And if the mind is free from conditioning, and I'd like to jump in here that he's assuming that Robert's mind is free of conditioning. Otherwise, how could I possibly, and it isn't. So how could I possibly? No one's mind is free of conditioning, I say. And that's why I'm a skeptic on the way that most people look at spirituality. And if the mind is free from conditioning, it should be able to work from pure intelligence, right? Which means acting freely without any biases and preconditioning. Is this not free will?
Yeah, well, there's a lot there, eh?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's addressing also, you know, different aspect. It's related to, we can relate it to free will, like saying, acting from what we call free will, or acting from pure intelligence, like he says at the end of his question. I would say it's a spectrum. So the spectrum for me would be from total unconsciousness, conditioning, programmation, mechanical life, to more and more of the intelligence, which is to me an aspect, as any other aspect, of the nature of reality.
Beautiful. There's where you and I, we absolutely coincide on that, Bernard. Absolutely coincide.
Yeah, so I would say it's a spectrum. You know, it's a spectrum. And I would say everything is a spectrum. And I don't see, it's a beginning and an endless end, you know, and we're all somewhere in the spectrum. So let's try to come back to, my view on free will, or my combination of views. Because I realize more and more that I have, I go more and more toward a combination of views. Well, we could start by tying it up with the story of karma and the cause and effect thing. Because it's easy to tie them up, so free will, well, if you do this, you get that, you don't do this, you don't get that. But that's also tied up, but that's also has to do with, I was talking about karma as two levels. From the point of view of ordinary life and the ordinary self and space and time, there is cause and effect. Obviously, it's a no-brainer, right? From the point of view, and you can apply that to the story of free will. From the point of view, I was saying about karma, cause and effect, from the point of view of here and now, as if from the inside of it, it's hard, or outside of it, you could say, or inside of it, it's all happening spontaneously, the totality of the manifestation is a spontaneous arising. You know, Robert often addresses, he hammers it, in fact, on and on and on about, you know, we're not producing all that, we're not doing all that, we're not, you know, and he's absolutely right. It is my, in the sense that it is my experience too.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. That's the basic idea. When I use the word wake, that is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Residing in that understanding, you don't need any. There's no more figuring out anything. If you don't need that. You can understand.
I understand what you're saying.
You do. Okay, go
I
ahead.
understand that point of view.
I'm sorry. I've interrupted. I'm sorry.
No, I don't remember who it was. It was
Bernard, this is just so delightful. I just want to let the rest of everyone in here know, you know, Bernard and I have been exchanging words for years, but it was only last week that I heard his voice and saw his picture on Zoom, and this is the second time, and I'm just so delighted. I'm still effervescent. So excuse my interruption.
Yeah, it's good. It was just coming up. There was somebody, I can't quite recall who, some teacher, and he was talking about the happening of all that happens, that totally happens spontaneously moment to moment. And he was saying, if you really pay attention and you really start to see that obvious fact, you know, but you need to really pay attention. And I guess you need to be equipped sufficiently to pay enough attention. The idea that you could do anything about it is just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous.
Yes.
There is this mysterious something that is producing every split second the totality of the cosmos, inside out. I mean, the idea that you could change anything about that is just, you know, it just doesn't make any sense, right? So that's one way to answer Manoj, where he was saying, you know, well, you know, I cannot do it, and how does it work, and you know, I can't understand it. Well, it's really about listening very closely to what is being said, whether it's Robert saying it or me, about the fact that really stop and see. Pay attention. All this inside out, this billions of things, looks infinite in size and all that, is arising totally, completely as a oneness, this moment and this moment and this moment. What does it have to do with you or me? We're part of their arising, you know, a drop in the ocean, but, you know, we're definitely not willing it, right? We're definitely not willing it. But now I will come to, what was his name? It's John, your name, right, John?
Yes.
Right. So free will. Well, the first thing I'd like to say, and as far as I'm aware, Robert, it's something that he said also, but I definitely said it repeatedly. As long as and again, I would say there's a spectrum there. Okay? I said before, for me, there's a spectrum in everything. So there's degrees, we're all somewhere there. As long as you take and you experience yourself as a separate person from everything else, you better take full responsibility. Not only that, you better take full responsibility, and as much as you can, align your will with the best that you feel and understand is the reality of things. Right? So if I'm aware and I understand to a degree or another, for example, that reality doesn't fight itself. It's just not its mode of operating, that a part of itself is fighting. Well, apart from where it becomes a human being that loses touch, it loses touch with itself to a degree that it goes into war with other human beings, but let's leave that aside. In its art, so to speak, it's not the way that it operates, that it fights itself, right? Everything is in harmony, you know, because it is the whole thing. So there's not two things to be in a fight. So it's all part of itself, the way, you know, I have shit in my gut at this moment, but it's not fighting with my hand. But the shit is the shit and my hand is the hand. But the hand is at peace that there's shit and the shit is at peace that there's a hand, right? So my point, where am I going? So I was saying, as long as we take ourselves to be, to whatever degree, a separate entity existing separate from a world of outside ourselves of things and people, we better take full responsibility. Oh yeah, and then I was saying, not only that, but you better exercise what you experience and conceptualize as your will, your free will, to the best of your understanding and feeling, oriented the way reality operates, you know. So, yeah, so that's what I was saying. So to the degree that you understand that it doesn't fight with itself, then don't get a fight with yourself. If you see, for example, that suddenly it arises that you have a judgment about someone, or, you know, anything that we could call, you know, not so awake, and, you know, or we could call the shadow, or whatever you want to call it, you know, things that are more difficult and uncomfortable. Well, don't get in a fight about it. Be like reality is. It has no problem that as a human being, anger can arise, for example. So anger is arising. Isn't that interesting? What is that? How come, you know, what is that? So back to square one. As to the degree we still see ourselves as a separate person, ordinary self, common self, having free will, well, fine, then exercise. And I heard you say that, Robert, also. Then exercise your free will to the very best of your capacity.
Right. What the way that I've put that is, to the extent that you feel that you have a choice, choose it well, do the best.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's all we can do. I mean, what else? I so much of when I try to put these my feelings into words, it's often a bit strange because the words don't really encompass the feeling at all. And I'm always a little bit concerned about misleading.
I understand. And the potential is always there the moment we open our mouth.
Yeah, would you say more about that, please?
Well, so, yeah, to go on with this, yeah, you say choose wisely. I certainly would say that. But I would add, which I already did, that in the context of these matters, choose wisely to me can also mean that, you know, as you think you have free will, but you're interested in those ideas, and, you know, you hear people saying they're awake and wow, sounds good, you know, and they seems to be doing pretty good. I'm interested. Then also, you know, as much as it comes to you to the best of your ability, well, which is what I said before, choose also in the direction that how does reality operate? Like not fighting, you know, not getting in a fight with anything that is arising.
Yeah, that's
Wisely would be hang out a little with people like Robert and me, just to say, rather than just always hang out in the bar with the drunkards. You know, it's okay to go in the bar and have a drink and hang out with drunkards and tell sex jokes and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, it's choose wisely would also mean that, you know, it could be a good idea also to take a break from that once in a while and, you know, look out if there's other people that have something else to say then, you know.
Well, that's right, Bernard. I mean, you could find me as a drunkard in a bar many times in this life. And at that time, I was saying the same kinds of things I'm saying now, pretty much, except you have to wander through acres of bullshit to get to one little grain of sanity. And then there'd be acres of bullshit, and then Robert shines again for a moment. See, and that's the difficulty with the way of life. We just have to somehow, I mean, you may continue to drink, but that's not the point. But somehow we need to, if we have free will, I don't even want to get into that. It doesn't matter to me if we have free will. I don't even know what it is. I don't know what that word means. I mean, it's so obvious to me that these words aren't coming from some volition. So
Yeah, but I guess you could say, Robert, you could reminisce. You could go back in time to a time where it obviously appeared as if you were choosing because you really thought that it was.
I thought what you just said, your exposition on this was just brilliant. That's exactly what it is. It's a spectrum.
Right. So we could talk then about a little about, you know, the other side of the coin or the other going toward the other end of the spectrum. Well, we come back to what we said, you know, some of the stuff that was said around karma. You know, am I the one willing all this really? Am I the one, you know, right this moment? Am I creating my being here, looking at this screen, looking at, well, I have Robert in my screen right now. Am I the one who has the power to speak? Am I the one who has created the eye, which is creating seeing? And so on and so on and so on. No way. There's no, just for me, it's just obvious. I cannot will all that. I'm not willing all that. I'm not, well, if there's one way I'm willing, if I'm willing that it's the way it is, I'm a willing soul, you know. But that would be the only, you know, will I could talk about. So, yeah, I mean, you know, it's the good old saying that thy will be done, you know, that you take it as it is.
That's it, Bernard. I was just about to jump in there and remark that this is where religion picks up on this theme. And actually, many religions pick up on it pretty well, but they're misunderstood by the worshipers. And so we get this world instead of a world where there'd be more understanding and so more freedom on the spectrum of no freedom, perfect freedom. I don't even know what perfect freedom is or would be. I don't even know what those words could refer to. It's not in my experience. My experience is that if I look deeply, if I'm willing to be honest, I will see that a lot of what I do is compelled. It's just compulsive, it's compelled. And go ahead, Bernard.
Well, you're obviously in a place which I've known since a long time where you're all, you know, you're in the happening of all that happens, period.
Yeah.
And that's the place. And yet, you know, everybody is where he's at with that. And so back to the question of free will. Yeah, you think you have any free will, which you're bound to think. Then that's the catch. You know, we're back with the catch of everybody is exactly where he's at. But then we hear somebody else than yourself talk about those things. You know, Robert or me or Buddha or anybody. And it's the real danger is you start to take that as your own and you forget where you're at. That's such a tricky thing, which, you know, you point out again and again. So somebody where he's at, the truth is where he's at, like Manoj, you know, was speaking quite truthfully from what I remember he was asking. You know, I don't know about no free will. My experience is, you know, free will. And so, you know, this is the reality. Right. This is the reality. So this is where one is at. Perfect. You know, if there's any perfection for me, talking of which, Robert, is exactly what is as it is. Perfect. You know, that's very simple, you know, including whatever it is, you know, that's just part of the perfect. It's not perfect as a moral concept or as fancy concept. It's just what is. It's just, yeah. So I'll go on. So, you know, many have pointed out of the importance, the essential importance of sincerity, of being sincere and authentic and honest with oneself, what one reality actually is. This is so important. And the more you can, you know, tune in the felt sense of what those words mean, sincerity and honesty and being an authentic human being, then for all the value of everything you've read and heard and understand intellectually, fine, it has its value. But you really get lost if you lose where you're at, because you are where you're at, whatever you think else. So start where you're at. So if my reality is I have a free will, there is something I can do, then definitely for me, it's like, yeah, use it wisely, like Robert says. And in the context of what we're talking about and meeting, you know, this kind of meeting we're together in, well, then it would mean, you know, find whatever works for you to the best of your ability to help you along in figuring out all this, you know. And don't anybody worth his grain of salt as a quote unquote spiritual teacher, for me, will bring it back up again and again. Nobody can give it to you. Nobody can do it for you. Because there's no way you will come to a certainty unless it's on the basis of your own experience. You know, there's no way you will come to a certainty unless it's on the basis of your own experience, in spite of all appearances. Because unless I've tasted the sugar, you know, I don't know what sugar tastes like. I can read all the books on sugar. I can be an expert on the concepts around sugar. You know, I said in the past, it's a play of word in French. In French, we have saveur, which means a taste, you know, a flavor, and savourer, which means to savor. Right? You have that in English, Robert? Savor? To savor?
We have the word savor. We're not total barbarians.
Right. So in French, it became the play of word that I found myself saying one day is beaucoup savent ou plusieurs savent, mais peu savourent. So many of us, many people know, but few savor it. So many know about it, but few, you know, few taste it. And unless you taste it, you test it, you taste it, how will you be sure? How will you come to a certainty for yourself that, wow, it truly exists? Whatever, you know, in whatever way you taste it, as an awakenedness, as we said it, there's many aspects to it, as this aliveness, like Robert would say, as, you know, there's so many aspects to it. But one thing is certain, is the moment you'll get a real good taste of it, if only a tiny bit, if only for a second, you will never forget about it. You might try, you might do your best, you know, to pull the cover over your head. It will again and again pull your toes and pull your ears and kick you in the butt, because you just can't forget it, because it's just so, such beauty, so freeing, so delightful, so simple, so, I mean, no words can touch it. It's so good, you just like, oh, wow, my God.
It's pretty relaxing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and for me, in freeing, there's that also. Oh, wow. Such ease, such release. If you have anything you'd like to share back, you're most welcome to do so.
Thank you. And just from my background, I've been around some of the Advaita, Neo-Advaita circles, and I've seen people twist that free will around, where maybe they did something that was slimy or a betrayal or something, and then they go, well, it was just the functioning of totality, the functioning of God. So that's where it's used in a way that I think can be very distorted. And I think both of you have addressed it. And I love the idea that you used of sincerity. Because I could do the same thing in that situation. I go, well, me busting your jaw for what you did was the functioning of totality too. See, you can take it to that extreme. So I've seen it used, and I like where both you and Robert are coming from in this.
Well, for me now you're addressing another issue, you know, which is a question that has been bugging the human mind since time immemorial. You know, if there is something if there is something at the heart of reality, or you know, and its very substance that is something that has some goodness and some, you know, let's leave aside the spiritual jargon around that. Let's take it very simply, you know, because it is our experience that there is some good in life and all that. So if there's that, how did that, you know, mesh with, how does that go with all the horrors that are happening? And like you said, you know, that somebody punched you in the face and all that. So, and then those guys, you know, some non-dual people will come and say, but it's been since time immemorial. I think people would say that, well, it's all the functioning of reality. Well, it's a very, there's a lot of tricky points there to me. There's a lot of subtleties there. You know, I might find myself saying in a certain context that, you know, like Robert, he said, we talk about perfection. I might find myself in a given context, suddenly find myself saying, yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, absolutely perfect. Now, the context, what I would mean by that in a given context would be that at the heart of it, I find that it's absolutely perfect. Now, as it comes out and becomes and, you know, manifests itself as the whole of reality, now, wait a minute. So a good example or a metaphor of that would be the human body. I might have cancer. I'm sick, I have cancer. I might, you know, might kill me in 2 months. So can't deny that, it's very real. Now, if we go in the body and we get more and more minute attention and tune in and we get to, you know, organs, and then we get to cells, and then we get to molecules, and then we get to atoms, to at the atomic level. Now, from the atomic level point of view, there's no disease there. Yet the same atoms are becoming the same molecule, which are becoming the same cells, which are becoming the same organ that now have cancer, and because of that, the body is going to die in 3 months. So to me, there can be a point of view where you can talk about the perfection of everything, but by saying that, you're not saying that it's all perfect on the level of the planet Earth and human life. No way you're saying that. It's obviously isn't. Anybody would, like you said, you know, and there are some that do that, who will just dismiss it. And, you know, I've seen it in action. I mean, I've been around too, John. You know, I didn't really count them, but I've been around, you know, live, meeting in person, at least a dozen, you know, quote unquote, awakened or spiritual, you know, enlightened, blah, 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 you know, teacher, non-teachers also, but that were said to be that. You know. And I've seen it in action. And for me, it was, what's the word I want to say? It was just cruel. It was just cruel. Somebody would come up and they're human beings like you and me, and they're just really suffering from something very real in their life, and their suffering is very real. And then it's just dismissed by the great enlightened one who's saying that, you know, oh, relax, it's all part of the happening.
Bernard, excuse me, you're just killing me here, man. Thank you so much. I just want to interject.
Yeah.
I've taken a lot of hard knocks for saying that these grinning gurus sitting on a stage are doing a lot of harm. And they may believe that they're doing good, but in my understanding.
Yeah, and some of them, it might really be from good intention, but we know that the way to hell is paved.
Thank you. Because when you said a few minutes ago, you just in passing, about hanging out with people like you and me instead of hanging out with the drunks in the bar, at least some of the time. Well, so you bracketed you and me in this kind of zone of where there's, on this spectrum that you're describing, there's some movement along that axis. And some freedom of movement also. I mean, I'm free to be an idiot. It does happen. So when you bracketed that, you see, that's the awakeness that we share. And that's what you're talking about. You're saying there's actually some quantity of awakeness here to, you know, schmooze with. That's a very different statement than the spiritual teachers are making. And I think this is, I interrupted, but this is what you were pointing to. You said you had met all these people and it was cruel. And that's how it
Well,
looked.
not all of them were cruel, but I've seen it in action, a lot of cruelty.
Yes, that's what I mean. There is a cruelty involved in a lot of this, where some person in pain comes and is given Advaita as the solution. That's just not, that's not it at all. Not at all.
And that to me would become part of why I would finally move on, you know. Some I've been with, you know, an hour, some couple of days, some a couple of weeks, some a couple of months, some over the course of some years. And yeah, you know, one of my greatest good fortune, I would say, in this lifetime about, you know, spiritual matters is somehow I was given, you know, it kept me on the move. Whoever I met, whoever I've been with, whoever, you know, teaching I've been, you know, interested in and even applied, you know, to various degrees. There's something in me that always kept me on the move. And it might have to do with the fact that early on in my late teens, early 20s, I had a couple, you know, strong enough for that time, you know, awakenings, you know, you could say. And it made it very clear, like from the start, that, wow, you know, it's something that is here inside out. And I don't know what it is, but, you know, I'm going to find out. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to find out, because that is like, wow, that's another order of you know, of experience, which brings me to something that I will take a tangent here. You know, I might say, Robert might say, anybody who's awake to a significant degree will say, in different contexts, it's just simplicity itself. It's just ordinary. It's just nothing special. It's just, you know. And that's true. On the other hand, from another point of view, it is also, but we're also saying that's, you know, suddenly we'll be in another context where we'll say that this awakenedness, this awakening, call it what you want, it has had many names. It's also something really, but really different than the ordinary conventional state. So we end up with this thing that we could say there's two kinds of ordinariness, you know. There's an ordinariness where we're just talking about where we are all starting from, and which is being pretty unconscious and unawake and asleep and functioning a lot out of being programmed. And there's an ordinariness, and interestingly, the first kind, it's the ordinary kind, but everybody thinks he's extraordinary somehow. And then there's another ordinariness. But I think it's important to point out that there's part of the awakening, definitely at the beginning, is there's a recognition that, wow, what is this? It's really other than, you know, it's really something else. And then in the course of time, as you mature and as it matures, you know, the realization comes sooner or later that, wow, you know, it's the nature of everything. So it's the most ordinary thing. It's just the nature of things. Yeah. So I just wanted to point that out.
Let me comment a bit also on that question on what you were saying about it. John, you mentioned this Advaita people, how they use the non-duality as an excuse for personal flaws. Well, you see that, and that is what seems paradoxical at a certain point. And what I understood Bernard to be saying, and my experience, is that it's not paradoxical at all. It's just part of it. It's part of the flow, that I understand that I'm not the doer and I do my best. That's not two separate things. It's just, that's non-duality, not that there's this one preferred viewpoint on the universe, which is no person really exists. You know, that's silly. Of course we exist. We're having this conversation on the basis that there is a Bernard and a Robert, and they have coincide on a certain, okay. So that's just silly. So that's why I write off non-duality. I should tell a story on that. I was, my old friend, Dr. Robert Hall, he's an esteemed Buddhist, he was in on a lot of this early stuff. He was the staff psychiatrist at the Spirit Rock Meditation Center, for example, stuff like that. He's on the inside. Well, he and I started meeting once a week to talk these matters over. It was an intentional meeting, and some of them got very heated, and we both at times considered not continuing. So it was very interesting. Well, but some of them were loving and, you know, celebratory also. Well, at one point we were discussing this stuff, and I had no intention of being a public figure, as I seem to be at the moment. And we were talking about this, and I said, look, it's like this. There was the Big Bang, and that's all just traveling outward at amazing speeds. And that's what we are. And Robert looked at me and he said, you're a teacher of non-duality. And I said, Robert, don't put me on a trip. That's exactly what happened. And yeah, okay, that's one observation. The other one is, you know, sock him in the jaw, as you said. Yeah, exactly. And, you know, I've been influenced by Zen very much. Not that I drank it down like some kind of Kool-Aid, not at all. It's just that it resonated with me. It just made sense immediately, and I got it. It took me about 5 minutes to actually get Zen. Honestly, it was just instantaneous. And probably in a past life, I was some kind of, you know, high lama or something. But right.
Something I'd like to say, you know, about, you know, that it's, you know, all the, like I said, it's an age-old question, you know. So what about all the suffering and the horror that is happening and all that? So down the ages, human beings have been, you know, trying to figure out how that works. So there's a lot of, you know, points of view and theories and hypotheses about that. At the end of the day, well, how I come, you know, I come down to is that, well, it's all happening. So in the happening that all that happens, we can't deny that all that is happening. There is this, you know, mind-blowing beauty and glory and, you know, wonder of life. And in the middle of it on this planet, definitely there's just this, you know, also mind-blowing horror happening. So, you know, that's just, so if one, you know, I'm open to say in a sense, you know, I can say that too somehow. It could even be the same words that some of those non-dual teachers might use. It's just that it's, you know, I've seen them, like we've been saying, using that totally out of context in a way that was just cruel, that was definitely for me, you know, not a relevant response to what people were, the context and what people were saying.
Well, so context is a perfect word.
Yeah.
And that's
very important.
Yeah,
it's very vital.
It's urgent. That's what this is all about, because if we're going to go deeply into the psyche or the soul, whatever you wish to call that, which I recommend, we're going to have to travel through many different layers, and behaviors and attitudes that are appropriate on one level don't work at all on another level. They just don't. And that's one reason not to wed oneself to all these heavy beliefs and customs that need to be acted out, because then you have the freedom to move through the levels and to, that's what I call this aliveness. I mean, we're talking about spirituality here, but to this aliveness, spirituality is just a very small part of the fullest expression of of feeling and seeing and wordlessly.
Yeah, it's the stories we made up to try to figure out what this is.
I was saying, you'd mentioned earlier an anecdote of yours of India where you were on your bed and you were, and the world became non-objective. You had no comprehension of it as objectively.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear you say something further, if you would.
It is pretty simple, Robert. It is really, I mean, sure, yeah, I guess, of course, one could say more about what, I relate to that as non-conceptual awareness. So to me, there are different kind of awareness. Like I said, often in many circles, the word non-conceptual refers to a level like I can have an experience of my knee or my leg, and they will call it non-conceptual if I just stay with the sensation of my leg. So I don't experience it via the word or the idea of the image or the concept of leg. So often in many circles, that's what they refer to as non-conceptual. I don't call that non-conceptual because you still know that it's a leg. So although the concept is not functionally operating, it's still there. But what I call non-conceptual awareness, then there is no leg. And it's not that there is no leg in the sense that your eyes are not seeing a leg. Obviously your eyes are seeing the leg, but there's no telling that it's a leg because the concepts are simply not operating. So really one of the best image I have of it is a baby, And I said it, if you're sensitive enough, just watch, and I know because, I have a daughter, so I've seen that. If you're sensitive, but you can watch it in any baby, just, next time it happens, pay attention. A very young one, couple months old. It's very obvious that they're just there looking around and they have no idea who or what. That will take quite a while. Months will need to pass until the brain will be sufficiently developed that they will start to have the capacity of discriminating, of retaining impressions in the memory, and so on and so forth, and all the workings of the brain having to do with the arising of the ego self and all that. So, and I would also, I think I said it also, it's something that is there all the time, but we're just overlooking it, There's a lot of very basic good stuff happening in reality that we're just missing because we're simply overlooking it. It's that simple because we're busy elsewhere.
Yeah, that's how I see my work in photography. It's just an ordinary town. It's an ordinary world. I'm just walking around in it, and but somehow it just looks a certain way. And then when I present that to other people, they say, "Wow, look at that." It's just an immediate seeing of without really naming. There's just an immediate undertaking of the, savoring, as you said earlier.
Yeah, I guess one thing you could say about this, what I call this, this experience that I refer to as non-conceptual awareness, is you could say that it's an extreme case, or you could say that it's like if it's one element, but then you zoom in and it becomes that. But yeah, any moment, that you're just being there, the mind is not operating, and you're just simply being there, this element is there. Now, if we zoom in on that element and we open it up, you can have an experience of that precise element to such a degree that, like I brought up, because I know you're aware of him, of Yuji Krishnamurti. Well, he literally was saying that, that when that calamity happened to him, because he didn't call it enlightenment, he called it a calamity for his own reason, then he was non-functional for quite a while because he just didn't know anything anymore. The whole conceptual knowledge was not functioning. So it took him whatever, days, weeks, I don't know how long, I don't remember.
Yeah, well, I understand that UG's story as quite likely being an actual physiological brain event, because that can happen.
Yes, and there is a physiology to it. I have a body. That's another topic, interesting topic too.
That's a perfect topic, actually. I was about to raise the topic of psychedelic drugs that we touched on in our chat, but
That's a good example.
maybe we could get to that, but I'd like to hear about let's go into the physiological. I have a body.
Well, to me, I hold quite a bit to reality as Gurdjieff to make me aware of that. All is material. From the tiniest thing to God, meaning the cosmic thing, the whole thing, it's all material. From the most subtle spiritual state, call it what you want, mystical state, to the most gross thing in the universe, it's all material. And to me, that's true. Because whatever I happen to be experiencing or whatever awakening I can have, a realization, they're obviously happening in this human body, which has a brain and a heart and all that. And there are obviously chemical components in this human body. I mean, a dog also has a brain and eyes, and yet obviously, doesn't have the kind of awakening as far as we know that we're talking about. But it's the same. So what accounts for the difference, Well, obviously there are chemical things happening. There's a material component to the human body that makes it possible for a human body that have this kind of experience.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So true that if certain of those chemicals are missing, then you're just like a vegetable. God knows what's happening to you.
Well, so actually that does go. I'm so glad.
Yes.
Let me just speak here for a moment, and then I'll turn it over to you. No, I've lost that. Go ahead.
Well, so we can talk about drugs. I did plenty in my youth. And a tiny little thing, of LSD, big like, a grain of dust, and my God, boom, how can that be?
Yes.
Obviously, it's all chemical too. It's all, in the sense that there's obviously a physical component,
Yeah, I was going to bring up this. I've taken a lot of psychedelic drugs at times, but the last few times, which was about 10 years ago, I did with great focus on consciousness, much more than I ever brought to those experiences before. And I used some very profound substances. I did this Salvia Divinorum. It's a member of the mint family, grows only in Mexico. If you get it's a 5-minute trip. And if you get enough of it, it's a total out-of-body experience. Not just no body, but no I. Although observation somehow goes on, but the I-ness of it disappears entirely.
Right.
So that you can remember the trip, but Robert was not there, not in the slightest. It's just like this nugget of information. It's like a book you can read after the fact or something, or some movie you saw, but you weren't there.
Right.
That's a complete disappearance of the ego state entirely, but it only lasts for 5 minutes. This kind of state that people say they're seeking in spirituality, to me, just seems useless. That's not, I'm just speaking for myself here, and I might be raving, but if, in my view, in my opinion, wanting something other than this is where we go wrong. We want to improve it, so I'll just take this drug, or I'll worship at this shrine, or I'll go to this and that satsang, and later I'll feel better, I'll feel higher. No. If you're not high now, how do you know you'll be high then? You might be low. So what I got from these psychedelic experiences, there were some others too with mushrooms. Katanya and I went up into the mountains of Mexico where these mushrooms grow and got down with the local people. And I was given this giant, they said, this is a grandfather mushroom, you know, eat this. And I did, I ate it. And I was just blown away. And yet a few hours later, here I am again, and here's Robert, and these thoughts are just arising and all the rest of it. And when I really look at it, I'm just being honest here, I don't want to escape from this. I don't want Robert not to be. That's ridiculous. It's a backwards wish in my view. I think that relates to what you were saying, Bernard, a bit earlier. This is it. And if someone, I know it's simple to say that, and it's hard to really understand if you don't already understand.
Yeah.
In the moment that we embrace myself just as I am right now, all of this just clears up. It's not that you know all the answers to anything, but there's a clarity to it, and there's no other way to get it except to just be here.
Well, I would have a few things to say about that. You know, first, I would formulate things differently. Like, to me, it's just a natural impulse when you're suffering to seek the release of that suffering. To me, it's a natural impulse. It's just, you know, if my hand goes and burns itself, my hands recoil from the pain. So that's one thing. I find that seeking happiness or seeking the release of suffering is a natural, normal tendency. The problem is that it doesn't work the way we go about it. That's the problem. You know, so for me, it's fine, it's natural. You don't want to see you're suffering, you don't want to suffer anymore. I understand, fine. Now, if in any way you want to change the state you're in, start to see and understand that you're only adding to your suffering because you're creating conflict. Because by having a part of yourself rejecting another part of yourself, which is, let's say, the one that is suffering, you're obviously creating more war, more conflict, more pain. Just really have a look, you know. So yeah. First thing is recognize that you're suffering and start. I understand that you want it to go away. I understand you want it different. It's totally unnatural. I get you. But just start to understand, as you want it to go away, that wanting it to go away, it's the best way to keep it there like it is. You know?
Danny, go ahead.
Hey, about free will, is awakening predetermined then?
Huh.
Because, I mean, like, let's say I can always, I mean, for example, I never felt like I had a choice in the matter to be interested in these things, you know? I can kind of see more and more how I don't really have free will because, you know, I grew up in my family and my mind went to, you know, seek stuff and I had to figure things out. I didn't have a choice in the matter in a sense. And in that sense, it kind of looks like, you know, well, I don't know where I'm going with that, but I guess that there's also, you know, this, sometimes you hear this, like, you know, like philosophy where time does not really exist and all there is this, and everything your life is about is kind of like you telling yourself a story where you got lost and so on. And in that sense, you know, it's arriving here is kind of like it should happen sooner or later kind of thing. Arriving in this moment or whatever. Anyway.
Well, I could, you know, say something about the first thing. Something about the predestination thing. I don't, you know, predestination for me implies that things have already been decided before they happen. That doesn't make any sense for me. So if we say predestination in that sense, I cannot go along with that. Now, if we talk about that, which we are pointing out, that things are happening and happening and happening by themselves, well, I happen to be a human being. I happen to find myself, in this body in this lifetime. It happened that at some point, it happened that some information came. Something in me happened to respond to that information like, oh, what's there? So something woke up, getting interested into what's that about, and that has its own momentum. So from that point of view, yeah, it's all happening, but I wouldn't call that predestination. I know I could call it destination at the most, and then even that, no, it's like, it's
Well,
just
that's my view on it. Also, I wrote about that in the 10,000 Things. Actually, I'm not in a position to know anything about predestination, so whatever I may say about it will only be my own logic, in a sense. But there's no reason to believe that all of this is scripted somewhere. That you don't have to believe that at all to understand that you are not the doer, which is the same. You see, it's the same question. It's just another. Bernard was talking earlier about point of view, mentioned point of view several times. This all comes down to point of view. That's the essence of it. It's all point of view. It's all where you're standing. That's what you're going to see. And predestination might be a certain feeling.
I can see how that doesn't serve a purpose to think about predestination, but I guess maybe just the feeling of chasing something your whole life kind of thing, having this itch, in a sense, there was no choice in that.
Oh, well, I would say that if you have that itch, you should scratch that itch. That's what Bernard was saying earlier. If something is painful, of course you're going to try to make it less painful. That's clear. And you see, the only way we would be so idiotic as to question this is if we get caught up in words. Because if you step down on a thorn and it goes into your heel, the first thing you will do is try to pull that thorn out. You won't question that at all. And this is what Bernard was saying. If you are in pain, of course you're going to seek some way of reducing that pain, or at least comprehending it. That's obvious. When I talk about being in the now, I don't mean don't just grin and bear it or something. That's not the idea. No, not at all. What I'm saying is, if I step down on a thorn, which I have done, we live in the desert here, and I get it in my heel, which has occurred various times. I carry pliers with me on some hikes. Well, then I'm going to have to pull it out. And I'm not going to then blame myself for wanting to pull that out. It's all of a piece. That is this moment. So if in this moment, Danny, you find yourself seeking, go for it. That's how you what I'm emphasizing, I guess, is to participate fully, not use some spiritual seeking or someone else's theory of what life is about to kind of turn down the volume on the anxiety. If you're going to feel anxious, feel it and use that anxiety to seek as best you can. I think, if I'm honest, that's how it was for me. That's how it is for me, I should say, really, because awakening never ends. And these things that seem certain to me now, maybe later won't. One of the things that I love about doing this with Bernard is that both of us have written a kind of testament over the years by commenting on Facebook publicly. And when I look back on his old words, which I did this last week, kind of preparing for this, and on my own at the time, they hold up pretty well. So I feel like I wasn't a total idiot at the time, and maybe I'm not a total idiot now. And for me, that's good enough. You know, whether there's any capital T truth to it, I have no idea. Honestly, that's the truth.
You are not a total idiot, Robert. You're quite an advanced being, and I can see that in Bernard's looking at you that he thinks you're pretty good, even though you live in Mexico.
Well, see, we were hitting on Gurdjieff before. One of the great, there's two things out of Gurdjieff that I just adore. One is the parable of the ants and the picnic table, which I wish I could tell now, but it's long and I can't. But the other one is the toast to the idiots. What he would do is he'd have an elaborate dinner every night of the week. And somehow he would shear the sheep, as he called it, in order to be able to provide all these goodies, which he would keep in a locked pantry. And then at dinner time, bring out all the whatever it was, and the good cigars and all this. He was a materialist in the sense that Bernard was talking about. Hey, it's all material anyway. So, you know, I like having a camera, for example. It's great. So. Anyway, he'd bring all this stuff out and put it on the table. And while everyone was salivating, he would make them drink toast after toast until they were all toasted. And these toasts would be to the various idiots, of which there were like 19 or 21 grades. And I love that, because when you say, well, you're an advanced being, Robert, or whatever, yeah, I'm an advanced idiot, which is, you know, and there's other idiots above that. And that's, we always have to remember that. An advanced idiot is still, you know, somewhere in idiot land.
May I say something, Robert?
Thank you, Sterling. I appreciate your good wishes. And it makes up for
I would like to say something about Mr. Gurdjieff, if you give me a moment. There are a couple of things that most inspired me about him, who I learned about long ago. Was one is that when he went from Russia to the south, across the mountains and around to Constantinople, he took all of his goddamn students and his family, and he took them with him in the most difficult period of time. So this man knew something that most of us could not imagine how difficult it would be. Another thing was later in Paris, and I think earlier too, I read that he always had a little piece of candy in his pocket to give to a child who maybe had not had a piece of chocolate or candy in their life. And that is to be so important. Anyway, thank you.
I have to step off. I have an appointment that I have to go to, so I want to say goodbye to everyone, and thank you, Robert and Bernard. It was absolutely wonderful. And do it again soon, okay?
Yeah, thank you, Martina.
Okay, bye-bye.
A joy seeing you, Martina. It was a joy seeing you, Martina. Be well.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah.
Well, we've been at this for quite a while, Bernard.
Yeah, I was just seeing that.
2 hours, so you know, I'm feeling pretty well satisfied. Unless there's someone else, I'd like to stay until all the questions are at least heard, if not fully explicated. So if there's anyone left who has been quiet and silent and now wishes to join in.
Oh, Mr. Martin Awood is here. Martin.
Yeah, hello Bernard. Nice to see your face and hear your voice.
Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I've just been. Been a few moments when I felt some questions forming, but then things have moved on, and I did feel it was a shame, really, that I feel I've got to know you in some way and Robert in some way, I feel
Right.
it's a bit of a shame that other people haven't been more involved. But for my own part, I was going to ask at one point when you described your experience of your non-conceptual experience
Mhm.
in India.
Mhm.
I was curious about when, I think you said when the I returned at a certain point. Was there anything different? Was that I informed in a different sense? Was there anything different about the I once it had returned? Did it have any lasting effect?
Well, I would answer to that something that you're probably aware of, which is, any taste that we have of being, of true nature, call it what you want. You have add, so it's like if you have a glass, of water, and then you add a little drop of something, well, it does what it does. There's some people, and I'm open if they say that, who am I to say otherwise? But there's some people that seem that they say, I had this one experience one day and it changed, everything for me. Though, in fact, when you look more carefully, usually you can see that it's far from being always true. But
Yeah.
so it had a lasting effect, but it was one event among, many other events. I would say that it had happened to a degree before, but I just hadn't noticed, because for me, it's something that is there all the time. And that was just a moment when suddenly it was forefront, right? Everything became background. So it's certainly nourished, nourished the transformation, the journey, however we want to look at it. Yeah, something like that. Small inner events, big inner events, they each have their time and place, as we say, in the whole sequence of our journey. And sometimes there are big events, and sometimes a small event can have a big impact, and a big event can have a small impact. It's like it's complex. Not that it's complex in itself, but we're complex beings, right? So
Because I've had certain experiences myself in different ways that I could describe as openings or whatever. But I think a problem for me was, which I guess is perfectly normal and understandable, is that there's this kind of desire to try and bring this back in some way, which takes you away from just being here.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah. And I don't think there's anything anything to be said about that. That's
it's natural.
Said about that.
It's natural. If I've had, I fell into this trap for a long time. At some point, I was given to see it more and more to the point where it started to change. But for a long time, I said it before, I had a couple quite powerful, experiences when I was quite young. And so for a long time, I wasn't really aware of it. But there was, part of my seeking and everything I was doing and psychotherapy and meditation practices and all that, it was informed by like, wow, that was so good. I want it back.
Yeah.
But at that moment, I would have needed somebody, or maybe even if maybe there was people, I was hearing that, but I just couldn't hear it because of where I was at, right?
Well, you must have
material.
You must have come by it at some point because it's manifest.
Yeah, but the real thing is whether I was in contact with those words or not, it has to be inwardly. Inwardly, at some point, I really start to get that, well, a few things. First, well, great that this or that happened, but who says that there's not other things that can happen and perhaps even more fantastic, groovy things, first thing. Second thing is, who says that because a thing happened, as howsoever wonderful, you know, it wants to happen again? You know, maybe, maybe not. Who am I to say? I'm not the one producing all this. And I could go on. So at some point, I started to wake up to the fact that wow, I was imposing for all kinds of reasons, which I was understanding more and more and seeing, my own will on the unfoldment of event. And then, like you said, Martin, well, that's a very common trap, as far as I'm concerned. It's a very common very common trap. And the sooner we see it, the sooner we give ourselves a chance to, you know, find ourselves disengaging from it, and then being open to the fact that, you know, well, let's be totally in the here and now with the content of our experience exactly as it is, and have a look at what that is. You know, I'm somebody who inquires regularly into the content of my experience. I inquire as a natural, spontaneous curiosity in whatever is arising. The same way that I'm playing guitar and suddenly I become curious about, oh, what was that? And, you know, oh, what's that? And what can I do more with that? I can inquire in any state I'm in. At this point, I'm not inquiring to get anywhere or go anywhere. It's just, I just love life. Something I shared regularly in some comments, you know, the best metaphor is when you fall in love with someone, you just naturally, spontaneously, you want to know everything about them. You can't, you know, you're asking them all those questions. You want to know everything about them. That love translates in the natural curiosity of wanting to know anything, everything about them. So for me, it's the same thing. And it's not that I'm doing that every second of the day, but there is this natural curiosity, which is the expression of just loving life and loving wanting to find out more about it. So whether it's something painful or something wonderful, you know, it will come spontaneously like, oh, wow, what is that? Well, it feels like this. Oh, interesting. What does that mean? You know, and then I zoom. Talking of zoom, I keep zooming and zooming. And the more I zoom on the content of my own experience, the more it reveals itself. It responds to the invitation. It just shows up more. If I don't inquire into it, it shows up as much as it shows up. But if I start to question, oh, where are you from? What are you in about? It starts to show up more. For me, it's just natural. So that's it, Martin. But yeah.
I would like to ask Racim if he would like to speak. Are you open to that, Racim?
Oh, do you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Hi.
Hi, Racim.
Yes, hello. Yes, I was also listening to your speech. Very interesting. I had this question that came to me, that you were speaking of this experience of yourself, that you had this in India, and you also described this state to be a kind of that you were pulled to it more and more. Like the more it opens, the more you want to see this, or the more you want to go to it. Kind of, if I understood it correctly.
You mean what I was just saying about being curious about?
No. At the beginning, I mean, at some part of your talk, you were mentioning like that it's even if you taste it just a little bit.
Yes.
So beautiful,
yes.
or it's so,
yes.
or more it opens the. And as a like a, let's say somebody who's listening to it, and somebody is getting curious about this state and wants to, let's say, know about it more or learn how to experience it, and asks you, how can I get there, or how can I also experience it? What would be your approach to this question? Like, how would you, like, yeah.
Well, that's the big question, right? That's the big question. Well, you know, we would need to do a whole Zoom by itself just for me to start to address what I have to say about it, because it's a huge question. It's a huge question.
Well, so we should do that Zoom. Let's put that one.
Well, I would be open to that because okay, so let's try in a few words to say what this question is. Well, I reminded Robert that, once some years ago, there was this Chris Scheid who asked something about that, if you remember, and I answered a big long thread, and that was just the beginning of it, and I had never gone deeper into it because he was asking basically, so what, anything can be done about it? And then I really started to go into it, and it's a vast, sure, we can stand in a place where we can say, nothing, nowhere to go, nothing to do. There's only that, here it is, basta. Okay, fine. Robert knows that, I know that, but obviously, as you're asking that, you're not quite aware of that. So I would personally respect that. So I will say, well, from its own point of view, there is nowhere to go. There is nothing to do, like they all say, because it is all that is inside out. So relax, have a cup of tea, forget about the whole thing, here it is. But for most people, as far as I'm concerned, that I've seen, it doesn't work. Maybe for somebody who is like, some people have said that, they're on the edge. Well, there's only that, it's all here and now, relax, have a cup of tea. Ding, it pushes them off the edge, and that's all they needed. Or they needed a Zen koan, or they needed the sound of a bamboo, or they needed a simple thing. But most people, it doesn't. Therefore, there are practices and paths and approaches. But then I have my own personal take on that, like anybody else. And so I'll say only one thing, unless we make another Zoom to go deeper in that direction. I mean, we could make many Zooms because we're just scratching the surface here and there.
But that's a topic that would be worth a conversation.
Yeah, definitely. That's a huge one, yeah. Right? But I'll answer one thing. And that would be, and it sounds simple, but there's tons of implication. And for me, it's actually, if we could call that a practice, for me, it's not even a practice anymore. But at the beginning, it could be for someone a practice, who knows. It is, when it comes back this, what is this old religious Christian saying, the old Bible thing? Love God with all your heart, with all your body, with all your soul, with all your mind. Well, drop the word God in the religious context, keep the rest. Whatever the content of your experience happens to be, right this moment or at any given moment, exactly how it is. You don't like it, including you not liking it. You like it, including you liking it. Because it's not, the totality of your experience as a moment is not only the content of sensation, thoughts, and emotions, and all that. It's also how you feel about it. And so you have to include, when you're a scientist and you're making an experiment, the scientist is outside of the thing he's experimenting upon. Here, it's the same thing, same objectivity and same going without, any preconception, but there's a difference. The scientist is included in the experiment. So there's the content of your experience, plus there's how you respond to it, how you feel about it, what you think about it. So you might feel in pain and suffering and you don't like it. So there's the pain, the suffering, and this other part of you that doesn't like the pain and the suffering. All that is obviously part of your experience. So whatever the content of your moment to moment experience is of life, of reality, as much as you can, simply be completely with it, with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your energy. Give it everything you have. And maybe one thing I would add is, so whatever, I'm not somebody who's knocking down anything in reality. So I'm not somebody who's knocking down what the mind has to say, You know, there's some spiritual people, they're knocking down all the time the stories that the mind say, you know, it's just garbage and all that. I know where they're coming from when they say that. I don't say that, because I say whatever story your mind is telling is as a connection always somehow to something, the whole of you, because you're having those thoughts, right? So so it's included also in the totality of my experience. So I welcome that. The only, what's the English word? The only other point I would bring is in this exploration, while you're welcoming the input of the mind also, the concepts coming as, you know, the train of thought, you stay in the felt sense of experience. You know, it would be like now if I would ask you, so my friend, after you asking me that and I just responded, all I responded, so how is it going right now? What's your experience right now? How are you doing right now?
Cool.
So
Yeah, I'm talking to, what's her name again?
yes,
Rasi?
I'm doing fine actually. I mean, I have also been in the spiritual search. I mean, I'm
Okay,
speaking
okay. So
now.
what do you mean by I'm doing fine?
What I mean is, right now, like, I accept whatever happens in my life. Like, in a way, I embrace it.
Right,
Like,
but I'm asking, you're saying I'm doing fine. Now that's a feeling, eh? I feel fine. Now I'm zooming there and I say, okay, what do you mean exactly by that? Because that's very vague. I'm feeling fine. I'm just doing with you now what it means to meet one's own moment-to-moment experience. So I'm asking you, oh, you're doing fine, wonderful. What do you mean exactly? What does that mean? Now, if you really understand what I'm asking, you have to take a moment, you have to stop, and then tune in the feeling of that made you say, I'm feeling fine, and tell me more about it, becoming more precise. So what do you mean I'm feeling fine? What does that mean?
you mean to look a bit deeply to the moment and to get in touch with your feelings and what you're experiencing
The
right now.
totality of your experience.
Okay.
It's really zooming in. We're in a zoom, you're turning the zoom there, you know, you're zooming in. And the more you zoom in, the more it opens up. And the more it opens up, the more it reveals of your reality, of the reality. Obviously, like in anything. You know, I see something, oh, what's that? And I start to look a little more closely and it comes into focus, right? We apply that principle in a million ways in ordinary life. So what about turning those capacities toward our own experience? Why not try that? Why not get interested about who we are? Not who we are as a spiritual concept or religious endeavor, but in the immediacy of our alive moment. What is this? What is this? It seems like nobody's interested, you know. They want to go elsewhere, you know. I did it for years. I would sit for, you know, when I was living in India, I had a period where I sat meditating for 6, 7, 8 hours a day for a few years. But a lot of it underneath, there was this thing, I wanted something. I was not just in the moment. It served its purpose. You know, it was a practice that really helped a lot into calming everything down, getting things more still and more clear and more simple. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't just this love affair with this curiosity and this. I mean, if I don't do it for myself, if you don't do it for yourself, who's going to find out what you are, who you are? The others are not going to do it for you. They have their own life. Nobody is that interested, you know. Nobody is that interested, unless those moments when we fall in love for a little period. You know, who are you? And we have those thousands of questions. And like I was saying, it's the same thing. Same thing. Ishq. Yeah, you seem to come from those countries. Ishq, right? You know that word?
Which
Ishq.
word? Sorry.
Ishq. Ishq. Where do you come from?
yes, I know. It's love, love, yes.
Eshkala.
Yeah.
Yes. It's passionate love.
So
Why not?
Bernard,
Yeah,
I like the ice cream story.
yeah, that was a beautiful one.
Oh, it's brilliant. You know, that's
Yeah, you could read that. You
what,
could read that.
maybe Racine would like to be in touch with you by message or
Sure. Yeah, that's a good example of what it means. Yeah.
Racine, you should get in touch with Bernard and ask him to send you the ice cream story because it's perfect on this subject. Just
Okay.
perfect.
Add me on Facebook. Wilson.
Yes, yes.
Where are you speaking from?
Yeah, I'm speaking from Austria. I mean, I'm in Austria now, but I'm from Azerbaijan originally.
Oh,
Azerbaijan.
that's exotic.
That's
Azerbaijan.
that's a very exotic country.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a rare country.
Yeah. Obviously, a simple thing. If we just go in the point of view, which is a true point of view too, to say nowhere to go, nothing to do. I was with Papaji when he was very little known, and after 3-4 days, I wrote a little something and sent him that, and he was starting by saying, so he had he would have those piles of message people would write to him. So Papaji finally come to my little piece of paper. Then he started to read it aloud, which sometimes he would start reading it for himself, but at that point, read it aloud. And it started by saying, it was like a small poem kind of thing. And it started by saying, no, nothing to do, nowhere to go. It's me, it's you, no one to know. And then he lifted his head and said, oh, wow, this is pure sutra. Who wrote that? Then I said, me, and he said, come here, and then I'll stop the story there. So yeah, nothing to do, nowhere to go. It's me, it's you, no one to know. So fine. But then what about all the other people who don't get that, So
that's the point. I think that's the point of this, that there's not one key that opens this one lock. Everybody has a lock, and whatever key, and that has to be found individually. It's what you were saying. No one's going to do this for you because nobody cares enough to do it for you. Even someone who loves you can't care that much because there's only so much caring. They have to care about finding the lock that opens this conundrum for them. When you love, it's not that you want the other person to open.
They can share what worked for them.
They can. But
and then you can take it as a working hypothesis and see if that works for you.
So no one can do your work for you, is what I say. So when I looked at this, years ago, I found that I was awake. And what I mean by that, this is not complicated. I had to admit to myself that these words of all these ancient sages suddenly made perfect sense to me. They were the way I felt. And I said, gee, I've been imagining that there was this mountain I needed to climb, and I guess I climbed it as much as I needed to. And now it flattened out. I mean, it's all this. So at that point, I was tempted to get into this kind of teaching thing. Fortunately, I didn't. I went back to school and got my PhD and did some psychotherapy instead, which is, I think, a much more reality-based approach, because then, as Bernard was alluding to, when someone comes to you in pain, you're trained to be on their level with it, not to be talking down to them from some realized, it's terrible. That stuff, it looks bad because it's a bad image. It's a wrong image. First of all, it's not always delightful to be awake. Far from it. It's just not. You're not always agreeing. If you're honest, you got to turn off your mic, Sterling.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was commenting on the truth.
Yeah, but that interrupts things too much sometimes.
Yeah, let me get this out here. So anyway, I found myself awake, and I asked, well, I just felt it should be shared in some way. And I don't mean some obligation or that's not the idea. I just had this feeling when you have something good, you want to offer it to other people. It's just natural. look, I have these chocolates. You can eat one. You might like it. You know, okay. Well, that's very hard to do. I tried it from many different directions, many different tools, and I worked with them and mostly failed. Almost entirely failed.
Well, that's why it's a big subject, you know, for all kinds of reasons.
Yes.
What can it do, what it cannot do, you know, and so on and so forth, and different tools for all kinds of different things, and how does this fit with this point and that point of view, and it's a vast subject.
So
I cannot dismiss it, you know, and so I did respond what I respond to Racine, but it's like, that's the best I could say in a minute, you know. It's like, whatever the content of your moment-to-moment experiences, well, you know, catch the thread of that and follow that thread, you know.
yeah, well, I understand that, and I have said that to people, but it often doesn't help. I think what you were
I
doing,
know. Then we get into, yeah,
I think
then
what
we have to get into other fields, you know. It's like,
right. Okay, well, so at this point, is there anyone left at the meeting who has not spoken enough? Because I'm still open.
you want to say hello, Nishkala? Come online and say hello.
Come on, Nishka. Turn on that. Here we go.
I'll just say hello, but I came in and out. This has been a long visit here.
It's been a wild meeting, yes?
You have these long meetings, don't you? Very
Well,
Long and wild meeting. Well, from
when it's lovely like that and rich like that, you know, as far
Yeah.
as I'm concerned, it's like out of time and it could just go on and on.
from my point of view, as I said earlier, I met Bernard online years ago, and we just had a lot of respect for one another, and we wrangled some, which is a part of respect, being able to do that with someone.
Mhm.
There's a love involved in a kind of honest confrontation, you know, but nonviolent. But
this. You know?
I had never seen his face this way or spoken with him until last week. And
Isn't that amazing?
it's just so lovely to look into his eyes and hear.
Well, I've known Mishkala since a little while on the Facebook, and it's the first time I see her too.
Well,
That was one of the reasons I came, just to see the aliveness in real time also.
Sweet.
After all this, you know, through the words.
yeah.
Sweet.
Lovely to see you all.
Thank you, Nishka. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert.
Anyone else left here in the?
Just one thing. You guys touched upon psychedelics before, and Bernard was going to say his version if something kind of touched him in that sense, but he never got to that.
About my experiences with psychedelics?
Yeah, like did it help you in some way? Was there something there that you could bring?
I did quite a bit when I was quite young. I didn't do it afterwards. Like I did quite a bit when I was really young, you know, teen and early 20s. Then I didn't for a long time, maybe, you know, 10, 20 years. Then at some point there was this wave going through of ecstasy, right? Everybody was taking that drug called ecstasy. And honestly, I had done enough that I was not interested anymore. But then at some point, my then girlfriend, who was living outside of Montreal, she comes to Montreal and says, well, this guy gave me, you know, those 2 doses of ecstasy. So I said, what the heck, you know, let's find out what they're talking about, right? Because I was not into it. So we went up the mountain. There's a mountain in Montreal, you know, which is like a big park. Took that, and then, you know, 15 minutes passed, half an hour, and suddenly the high started to come on. And honestly, I just laughed in my beard. It was like, oh yeah, I know that well, you know, because I had done so much LSD and magic mushroom and all that. It was just a variation on the same theme. So it was just like revisiting an old experience. And that was it for me. It stopped there. I would say that, you know, I would say 2 things. The first thing I would say is that for me, they're not something to be messed with. There are powerful substances, drugs, and we don't really know yet fully what it does to the body. So that's a problem, potentially. So they're very powerful substance. We don't really know what it does to the body, so tricky, right? Second thing is, yeah, okay, to initiate something, I like that the word initiation, people forget that. It means also to initiate initially. But if you do something that is supposed to initiate something initially, but you keep redoing it, you're missing the point. The point was, it was an initiation to initiate something. But then people take a drug or they take ayahuasca or whatever, but then they go back and go back and go back. For me, there's something that, it's problematic. So first thing is they're powerful substance. We don't really know what they do. Be careful. Second thing is if you do take it, well, in the best scenario would be in the best environment possible, and if you can have some people that you trust that have some experience with it, that's helpful too. And, but I don't know. It's a good question, I wouldn't, somebody would come and say, I want to do it. Well, I would say, okay, you want to do, who am I to say? But, if you really push me in a corner to tell you, well, you say I should do it or shouldn't do it, tricky. I mean, I guess I would answer to that the more I know the person that is asking that, the more I would be in a position to answer that kind of question, or you push me in the corner, like if you want me to tell you do it or don't do it.
But I'm not asking you.
No, I know you're not.
To do something.
But I'm saying that to say that if I know you enough,
yeah,
and I feel in you that there's something fragile about your psychic structure of your ego self, then maybe I would say, no, don't touch it. I know some people that, as far as I'm concerned, it's not good for them just to smoke a joint, of marijuana, because they're so fragile that they just smoke a joint and they're all over the place and they disintegrate more, not in a good sense. They're actually people who would need some therapy that would help them to get structured more. The coherence, So like, well, that's again, that could be a whole Zoom in itself.
Okay, that's another Zoom. But
not only, well, it's like we're talking about what to do or not to do or what could be helpful, but then there are points in that and we could open to a whole other Zoom, like the dangers of a teaching that just says to someone, drop it all and all non-dual and all that. That could traumatize them. I've seen it happening. I've seen people around Papaji getting traumatized in a bad way. They ended up going out of being with Papaji in a worse way than when they got in. I've seen it happening because it was a very non-dualistic kind of approach. Because for me, non-duality is just a vast, there's the contemporary ones, but, so it's tricky. It's complex. We're complex beings. So I'm with Robert that the moment we open our mouth, that we want to interfere, somehow life brings us in a position that we're kinda, interfering in someone's life. Well, watch your step, baby. Watch your step.
Oh yeah, well that's what I was getting at before. Somehow it got shifted away from that theme, but I did want to say something about that. I was saying that I had, when I started to feel that this loveliness should be shared somehow, which I did feel. And that can be called into question. That's what are the real motives? But we'll leave that aside. I went into psychotherapy instead of spiritual teaching, and I'm really glad I did, because I didn't have the proper structure, as you were just calling it, ego structure, to be a spiritual teacher. I would have ended up probably like one of these ninnies that we see.
Creating a lot of trouble for yourself.
Yeah, I would have made more trouble for myself than I already have by now. And so what it boils down to for me if someone comes to me and asks me how, I have, at least at present, there's only two things I can do about that. One is to actually manifest that, which is rather costly at times, but I seem to be managing it. I'm doing it right now. And the other thing is to keep on encouraging that person away from the ideas and beliefs that are received from the outside entirely. I don't mean throw them all away, but you can't use them as your key to turn the lock.
Right.
And as soon as we understand that, Danny or Rasim, I'm speaking to both of you, I think, on that level, what you can do, there's a parable about this, it's short. A guy is looking under a street lamp, he's searching everywhere. And well, this other fellow comes along and watches him for a few minutes. The guy's getting nowhere, so the new man on the scene goes over and says, "Hey, buddy, what's the problem?" And the first fellow says, "Well, I lost my house key. I'm searching for it because I've got to get into the house." And the other guy says, "No worries, I'll help you." So they search around for about 15 minutes, and finally the helper says, "I don't see it anywhere. Are you sure you dropped it here?" And the guy says, "No, really, I dropped it over there somewhere, but the light's better over here."
Right.
You see, we have to look in the dark. That's the whole point. And so the guru idea is the guru is going to shine this bright light on some part of his or her experience, and you're going to see how bright it is and just adopt it, just eat it. And it's just not like that. We have our dark side, and that's where a lot of the understanding of powerlessness comes from. And even though we don't really like to feel powerless, I think Bernard will attest to this, I know I will, as soon as you actually see the powerlessness, you feel wonderful about the whole thing. It's so relaxing to understand, I say, that all of this is just happening, it's arising. Robert's not doing anything. I mean, what Robert is, we don't know, but it's definitely not in charge. And as soon as one sees that, it's a beautiful relaxation. It doesn't mean it's always pleasant. Sometimes you have to relax into pain, but you're not causing the pain and you're not causing the joy. That's life, that's the aliveness. So those were the two things. I'm just saying this now to Rasim and to Danny. Those are the two things. One is, I'm not the doer. This is all arising. And all I can do is manifest that. I can't convince you of it, but I can laugh and, you could see that it's a good trip. And then the other thing is to tell you, don't listen to Eckhart Tolle. There's very little truth there. What this guy promises is to teach you to see auras and improve your aura. Well, I don't think that's really going to solve it. Maybe it did for him, and if it did, mazel tov. But what I'm encouraging people to tune those guys out, making a lot of money off of this. They've got a whole crew publicizing everything. That's not where truth is, except Bernard could now object and say, well, the truth is everywhere. Okay, that's true too.
No, that's not what I would respond. What I would respond is I have no problem going along with everything you said. The only catch for me, and I said it before, is as far as I've seen, and also based on my own experience, because pretty much from the start, 40 years ago, life in one way or the other told me, man, this is it. There is nothing else. This is it. I couldn't hear it. So while I know that that's the truth, the reality I've seen in myself and witnessed in so many other people is it just doesn't work for them. So then what? If we stop with that, we don't need to do another Zoom just about, the doing part, whether something can be done or not, and if, what, blah, blah, blah. But then we come back to that, you know, like I said it before, I was with Papaji before he was known, like it was still all in a small room. We were just a bunch of people, maybe 30, 40, you could still visit him at his house and all that. So I was there for like 6 months, something like this, you know, every day it would be satsang and you could ask questions, and if you were brave enough, which I was, you could knock on his door and visit him, you know. And so I'm grateful for the time I had that and what it gave me, that period of my time, and to have met him and everything that happened during those months. But in part, because I could talk about many reasons, in part, why I came to a point at some point where it's like, oh, it's really time to go. I did go back afterwards for a very short period because I was in the area. Was that I was seeing all those people sitting around day after day after day after day, week after week, month after month, being told again and again in 1,001 way that this is it, you are that, nowhere to go, nothing to, like I had written to him, like I said before, you know, nothing to do, nowhere to go, it's me, it's you, no one to know. They were just not getting it. And me, because of how it started, but that's a very sweet story, but maybe I'll tell it another time. I became very soon part of those who had got it, right? But I'm saying that because there was this expression, you know, you got it or you didn't get it, right? You get it when, or like Robert Saltzman would say, you get it when you get it and you don't if you don't, which is true enough. So it's nothing new. So there were those who got it and those who didn't. So I was sitting there and months were passing. And I was seeing those people, and some of them, they were becoming friends. Some I had known from before. And nothing was happening for them. They were just sitting there, day after day after day, nothing was moving, nothing was, you know, and that was in part, at some point for me, it was like, no, you know, it's for all the beauty that I found here and for all that existence, reality has given me through being here. There's time to move on because there's something, then what do I say now?
You better watch it, Bernard, because you're about to get into trouble the way I have if you say anything more.
Well, I'm open to that.
I can hear it coming now. Oh, you're brilliant, man.
You're thinking about Deep Field, which I sent you on a private message, and about how we don't know really very much. But you guys are really great. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind.
Thank you, Sterling.
No, it's not kind. I'm just trying to be truthful.
Wow.
See you later.
Let's see. Anyone further?
Yeah, last
chance
for everybody. If somebody,
I got a request here. Yes, I got a private message. Someone would like to hear you finish your Papa G story that you were going to tell. That was sweet.
Okay, so I'm there. You know, when you would arrive there because you were one of the new people, you would get a front seat, right? Because you were new, and you would get a front seat, which basically mean that, you know, they would make you go in first so you could be sitting. You know, he was sitting on a, how do you call that in English? Well, some kind of base, you know, little platform, so everybody could see him, and we were sitting on cushions, you know. So already, you know, whatever we think of Papaji, you know, already there was somehow this whole guru thing happening there. You know, he's sitting a little higher than everybody, and there's the big picture of Ramana Maharshi behind his head, and these pots of flowers, and so on and so forth. I close the parenthesis. And me, I was pretty afire when I got to Lucknow, because I was somewhere else, and then all those people were coming, and some were friends. oh, there's this Papaji in Lucknow and all that. And at first I just dismissed it. So I'm not interested. I wasn't at that moment. But then when friends, people I knew started, they would come back from Lucknow and there would be this twinkle in their eyes and they would say, wow, that was great. Then I got a, you know. And I remember clearly thinking, well, I don't know. I don't feel like going now, but I'm open. If one morning I get up and it says go, I will. So one morning it happened. I got up and it's like, let's go check that out. So I make it to Lucknow. Go on back to the story. So I'm given a front seat for 3 days, I think it was. So I came there very keen. I was very, you know, it was at a period and a moment at a junction where I was quite afire with, you know, what somebody has called the flame of the truth, you know, where there's just something aflame in you. You really, you know, you won't be satisfied with the words of anybody or any words in any book or whatever anybody has to say, including your own mind. There's just this flame of the search inside you, and it's just, you know, driving you, and you're honing, you know, not fooling around. You're really thirsty, and you know you're thirsty, and there's nothing that is going to distract you. So I really, just to say I got there, I was very, you know, alive. So 3 first days, I just checked him out. You know, for the 3 first days, I just looked at him and checked the interaction with the people. And one thing he would do is either people would raise their hand or they would write before, and he would have this pile of little papers. And then, you know, he would either or not say to someone, yes, what is it? And either or not, he would respond then and there, or he would tell the person, come here, you know, and then he would sit in front of him and he would have a one-to-one interaction with him. So my story is that after 3 days of checking him out, I'm in the morning before going to satsang, and then it just comes up, well, okay, let's write a little something. So I sat down with pen and paper, and then it came up like cadrons, you know, like spontaneously. There were like 2 or 3 of them. The first was, nothing to do, nowhere to go. It's me, it's you, no one to know. I remember the last one also, because it's related with Ramana Maharshi, who am I? One precious key, this who am I? It's 1, 2, 3, go, gone, goodbye, right? So he takes the piece finally. So I'm sitting there, and then somewhat a level of anticipation is coming, as I know he will come to my little piece of paper. He comes to it and starts to read it, and then he raises his head and he says, well, it stayed in my mind's eye in this moment. He says, wow, this is real sutra. Who wrote that? And then I lift, you know, I raise my hand, I say, it's me, Papaji. And then he says, come here, you know. Then I got up. The moment I got up, I was gone. I mean, you know, it just, the whole happening took over. I was like suddenly drunk. So something fell on me, where suddenly I ended up in this kind of open space, spontaneous and all that. The little me, the little Bernard, who could think that he's in control of anything. No way he could control that. So I'm wobbling, you know, kind of using the heads of people to steady myself. I come to him, then I fall across his lap. You know, it just happens. The whole thing happens. So normally, and everybody does that, you come and you sit in front of him. That's not what it happened for me. I fall literally across his lap, and we end up, like, imagine you fall in my lap. So we end up in the arms of one another for the next 15, 20 minutes, where he's just holding me. I'm on his lap with my head resting on his shoulder. And I have my eyes closed, sometimes open. When I open them, we're like eye to eye. We just crack up laughing. And then my eyes close and we just fall in silence for some minutes. And suddenly my eyes open. We crack up laughing again. I remember at some point opening my eyes and looking in the room, and the whole room is just cracking up and is full of light, and everybody is just. So that was my first encounter with Papaji. I ended up on his lap and we laughed our heart out, our minds out. And yeah, that just, but then, you know, I could say in the course of the months I was there, other significant things happened with him, unique things. But I'll stop there. That's another story. Maybe one day I'll share it publicly or write about it publicly. But yeah, that was a juncture that had definitely its meaningfulness in my journey of spending time with him. And I remember the very last meeting we had when people would leave, we would have those farewell meetings privately with him. We were 3 or 4. I get into his bedroom and he's sitting on the bed. Again, spontaneously, nothing I had. If I would have thought of it, I would have never thought of that scenario. I walk in the room, people are sitting, I think one is sitting maybe on the bed next to him and a few people on the floor, but we were just like 3 or 4. And I just spontaneously find myself, though I'm leaving the place, and I'm there to tell him, though I'm leaving the place and though I'm leaving with some reservation with what I'm perceiving is happening there by that point, I just find myself sitting next to his legs. So he's sitting on the bed, on the floor, and putting spontaneously my head down on his lap. And then when I got in, he was talking he just put his hand on my head and he keeps talking to the person, like if I'm, a kid with grandpa, And to me, there was just all this love and appreciation that happened between us, pretty much from the start. And in the midst of all the rest that happened for me being there till the end, where I left because it was time to leave. Because in one word, for myself, it was just getting too narrow. It was getting too narrow. It was something in me that couldn't be confined. So that's one thing, maybe that's a good place to end, Robert. We have that in common, that you can hold all kinds of position in your own way as it comes for you. I can hold all kinds of position in my own way as it comes for me. And what we both have in common that there's something awake in us that just can't be confined. However fine, I confine is with the fine. So however fine it is, it just can't allow itself to be confined, however fine it is.
Yes, that's true.
And
different people, both men and women, with various means of persuasion, have tried to nail me down or frame me in some way, but it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
There's a rebellious heart beating here. It's just you can't get a halter on my nose. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
No way.
Right.
And that's beautiful. That just may be a personal attribute or a genetically induced attribute for all we know. There may just, if I go back to the materialism that you were talking about before, everything is material substance, then a lot of what we are is encoded in our DNA, which is a material substance, and it doesn't, the DNA itself can't think and have ideas, but when it manifests as a living body, then it has the ideas, and those ideas are used to reproduce the DNA, and therefore the human body is only a way of the DNA self-replicating, if you want to look at it like that.
Yeah.
Which is a tremendous sign of intelligence. It's just the intelligence that we can't comprehend. So yes, and so perhaps this quality that Bernard and I share of you can't get a halter on me, in no way, you just can't. You can't offer me any inducement sufficient to make me bow. And what you did with Papaji is an experience. And when it was time to leave, that's because that's not where I want to be all my life, on somebody's lap. Yeah, right. So that's it. So that's a hard road.
Yeah, it was also me. I'm someone who went through many paths, through many approaches and practiced them and hang out with different teachers and to various degrees. So, well, I said it before at some point, I think in the meeting, if there's one thing, one of the basic things I'm grateful for in this lifetime is that reality made me in such a way that it always kept me on the move, you know. So whatever it offered me, whatever it gifted me with, whatever it made me experience inwardly, outwardly, there was always something that, I think it was Buddha was saying, it's reported that when he was on his deathbed, you know, one of the last things he says is, charivati, charivati, keep going, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, keep going.
Yes. No feeling is final.
Right. No feeling is final. There's no end to the potential of realization, of understanding, of insights.
Yes, that's right. Awakening never ends, right? Last chance, last call to the...
Yeah, very last now. It's getting enough.
Well, whoever you've managed to hook up with, you have to take home for the evening. Last call. I'm just tripping on the last call for alcohol. What can I buy you a drink?
There's a few women I don't know. People I don't know. Cindy, Marie.
No, it's like I love raving at the end of these things in one word.
Danny, Florian Rasmus, Nishkala, Michael, Gretel.
Yes. I see Gretel back
Two
there.
women that have been keeping quiet.
I see John giving the high sign.
Yep.
Yes.
Well, so it looks like, Robert, that this is it.
It's been a great party. Thank you so much. This is wonderful.
Yep.
Bernard, I'm so grateful to you for sharing yourself.
Well, I'm grateful that you invited me for that and that it happened.
It wasn't easy to get you here. I should say that. I had to play you like a fish.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm not a public figure, and it's not something I've done in my life. So it's like, okay, you know, I really had to look, you know, take the time to, because we did mention it first, like it came up maybe a month ago or so, you know, at some point as a joke kind of thing. And
that's what I mean by play you like a fish. It was never a joke to me.
Right, so, you know, I sat with it and it percolated for a while, and it's like, okay. And,
well, you know what, Bernard, this is pretty new to me too. I'm not. You publish a book and you become a public figure. It works like that. And this is not my usual milieu. I've spent most of my time alone or with two people in a room talking about eldom or whatever. That's been my life. So this is, you know, being on stage in a sense is new to me too.
Right.
But we're doing okay with it. I mean, you know. So I always feel giddy at the end of one of these things. We've flown.
Sure. I mean, sure.
Taken in a lot.
I mean, right now I feel all this sweetness. I feel very alive, very relaxed. I'd like to extend a warm and grateful thank you to everybody who was here and is here still. And thank you again, Robert. It's just been lovely and juicy and interesting.
It's a true joy. It really is. It's a joy to be here and to have you as a friend, and to have all these others who made the meeting and made the meeting what it is. It's really great.
And all those others in the future.
I'm going to use the language of the enemy. I feel blessed. I feel blessed.
You didn't forget to record it.
He is, you know, he's so great and I'm so pleased.
I'm thinking of all those who might see it later. You didn't forget to push the record button this time.
It's running, man. I got a couple of things that you said and the way you looked at it are just brilliant. They'll make little 5-minute videos. They'll be great.
Yeah, or, you know, obviously editing is a good thing. Maybe I repeat myself every now and then. I probably do.
Okay. It's always painful to actually click the end of the meeting.
Right, I understand.
5, 4.
Bye,
for
everybody.
putting it together.
You all be well.
Bye.